board workshop. If you could rise for a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I don't have any public input. Do you have any public input? So we don't have any public input this morning, so we are going to go right into something I have been looking forward to for a while now. So we have our student dress code recommendations from the Superintendent Student Advisory Committee this morning. You want to call through some presentation?
So I am really excited for y'all to meet this fabulous group of students today. And so DenCove is going to kick it off. They have put together a presentation. They've worked really hard to bring you this recommendation today. And so good morning. And you all know DenCove. I will just stop for 1 second if you haven't seen him. He is the featured article in this month's Style magazine. So congratulations on that. And, I brought you an extra copy. I'm sure your mother would love to have another copy of that.
Go pick up as many as you can. Just grab them. Just grab them.
Well, good morning.
So, good morning, Chairman Luke, Superintendent, members of the board. Mr. Matthias, you were a little ahead of us on the pledge today, but it's okay.
Yeah. Oh.
So we are very excited to be here at this workshop this morning to give you a update on our dress code, and we'll also be giving you an update on something that the board has been working on a little bit, is the class fees. And I'm also going to give you my report as a part of our presentation. So, since I last saw you all, the SSAC has met twice. At our December meeting, we finalized our dress code recommendations for the superintendent and Dr. Feltner to review. It was then sent to high school principals, and each president throughout the month of January met with their principal to kind of go over any last-minute concerns. And then at our January meeting, we took those concerns and made some final little tweaks to our dress code recommendation that we'll be presenting today. And also at our December meeting, we took an initial look at the policy that the board has been discussing for a little while, related to specifically the concerns about class fees and parking fees. Now, we thought it would be appropriate for us to weigh in on the matter. So today, the class fees recommendation will also be a part of our presentation, but we want to hold off on the parking recommendation to collaborate more with the high school principals before we bring something to the board for final review. And at our January meeting, we drafted a letter to the board that is currently up on board docs with our recommendation for the class dues. And then also at our January meeting, we had an initial discussion about holding a district-wide SGA conference for all of the high schools and the high school SGAs in Lake County to kind of collaborate, learn from each other, and just have a good, fun time. So you, like the superintendent said, you all know me, but you have not had the chance to meet the rest of this amazing group of students. So I want to start with my vice president, Leah Pasternak at Leesburg, the president at Southlake, Jasmine LeBud, the president and committee secretary, Michelle McCoy at Lake Mineola. Then we have Kendall Henderson, the president at Mount Dora, Haley Johnson, the president at Umatilla. I'm sorry, I'm going to mess it up. Emma Ethington, the vice president at Umatilla, Cole Baxley, the president at Eustis, Tyler Hines, the student body president at Tavares, and Selena Gomes, the senior class president at Tavares as well. So without further ado, we want to get into our presentation. Will the slides be on the screen?
Yeah, they'll be on the
okay.
screen. They're working on them. Mr. Johnson, hurry up. There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
Next slide, please. Slide after that one. Okay. So, was this one me? Yeah. Okay. So the dues and fees. So when we kind of looked at this, the dues and fees, we think that establishing a uniform plan for the collection of class dues and fees, it would be the best thing. And we want to make a good recommendation to the board. Next slide. So each president is going to give you the findings of what the class dues are at their school, broken down by grade level. So we'll start with our East Ridge president, who is not here. And I don't have her numbers off the top of my head, so excuse me for that. And we'll move on to Eustis.
Hello everyone, my name is Cole Baxley, and I'm the SGA Executive President at Eustis High School. All my 4 years at EHS, we've never really had class dues, and as I'm aware, we're the only high school in Lake County that does not have class dues. And I believe this does show some form of inconsistency within our schools regarding dues. And although I am aware that our principal is planning on doing dues next year across the board for $20, that was his initial plan. However, we are suggesting one that we think is also quite beneficial. And pretty much, we believe in the past several years, it's been difficult, especially for my SGA, to raise money with everything going on in the world with COVID. It's been quite difficult, especially when raising money for prom. I know firsthand that was a bear. And we believe that pretty much a county-wide due requirement would be pretty beneficial for all of us. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Leora Pasternak. I'm the student body vice president from Leesburg High School. As far as our class dues go, seniors pay $5. That price goes down just because it's a privilege of being a senior. Our juniors pay $20, and then our underclassmen, freshmen and sophomores, pay $25. Before, when I first came into high school, we didn't do class dues, and it was very hard for our student governments to raise that money. We could see it very clear in our class accounts that it was a lot of pressure basically on our class officers to raise that money. But I think it was my junior, sophomore year maybe that we reinforced those class fees again, and that has been a tremendous financial aid to our student government as far as our different events we have go with in our classes and just paying for our graduation overall.
Good morning, my name is Michelle Mccoy. I am the student government president at Lake Minneola High School. And as far as our class dues go, they differentiate among class level. So for freshmen, they're $5, sophomore $10, juniors $15, and seniors $20. And this is the early bird special, which happens before homecoming. So everyone that pays their dues before homecoming gets that as their low rate, so their early bird special. And then after homecoming, dues increase by $5 by each grade level. So freshmen would be 10, juniors 15, sophomores 15, juniors 20, seniors 25.
Good morning. I'm Kendall Henderson. I'm the student body president at Mount Dora High School. And I talked with our assistant principal a couple days ago, and she said that we are changing at the beginning of next year. It's going to be $20 for each grade level overall. And that money goes towards our graduation. We've always had class dues, and that definitely has been really helpful for raising money. But next year they're all starting. Each grade is going to be $20.
Good morning, I'm Jasmine Landaberty. I'm the student government president at Southlake High School. Currently at Southlake, the fines are different for each grade level. Freshmen are 10, sophomores are 15, juniors are 20, and seniors are 25, and that remains consistent throughout the year.
Good morning, I'm Tyler Hines, the student body president at Tavares High School, and currently our fees differentiate between the grade levels as well, except 9th through 11th grade, it is $20, and then when you become a senior, it's only $10. So you pay $90 overall, and then, of course, they travel with. But personally, it wasn't until my junior year that they didn't really start reinforcing the dues. And in order to reinforce them, they started giving you a free T-shirt, a class shirt, and then that was taken out of the class dues. So even though you were paying a certain amount of money, they still had to pay for the T-shirts, so that wasn't still a lot of money that we're receiving. So I will admit that it is also difficult for us to raise money as well, just because of that. Thank you.
morning. I'm Haley Johnson. So at Umatilla, as you can see, we kind of do things a little bit differently than them. They start low and then go high. Our freshmen actually start high and then we go low. We have more of a stacked thing. So our freshmen pay 20, our sophomores are at 15, our juniors are at 10, and then our seniors, for a little relief, are at 5 because we know they have a lot of other things to be paying for. One way that we have made class dues be reinforced is if you haven't paid your class dues, you do not go to homecoming. So if you have not paid your class dues, you cannot buy a homecoming ticket. So that's just one way that we've made sure that class dues get paid because they do help send money back to our classes. Thank you.
And I do have the data now for Eastridge. So theirs is $20 for freshmen and sophomores, juniors are $15, and then it's $10 for seniors. So you just heard each president explain how difficult it is sometimes, especially with events such as COVID, to fundraise for major events like prom and graduation. So this slide is explaining our why of we supporting class dues as a way for each class to have money to move with them from their freshman year to their senior year and to help pay for different things along the way. Like I know last year, paying for prom in and of itself was just a lot on our junior class, especially since we had not previously done class dues at Leesburg. So it was a little bit of, ooh, where's this money coming from this year to buy the venue, to buy decorations, and just different things to actually make prom. Next slide, please. So our recommendation on that is that 9th through 11th grade be $20 and that 12th grade be set at $10. Now, you did hear some of the presidents say that their dues were lower for different grade levels, but if you were to take a class of 230 and multiply that by $20 and everyone paid their class dues, that's $2,800 that class and those set of officers have to kind of do events for their class. So that would be our reasoning behind that recommendation.
Can I ask a question? Maybe a
Yes,
clarifying.
ma'am.
I know that you and I know that Mr. Baxley said he has some experience with it. What is the cost of prom? Like, how much did you guys pay for your prom last year?
Yes.
I know. That's what I wanted to put that out there. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so I was kind of the one being the liaison last year with our junior class in prom. It really depends on your venue and things like that, which is obviously it can get expensive. We'll just put it that way. Last year, we ended up paying around $13,000 for our prom, just because our venue making it having to be outside, it was so expensive, and there was only a small amount of venues that aren't like hours away that'll allow us to have an outside prom, which is why that really was expensive last year. In the past, it definitely wasn't that much, especially because past junior class sponsors haven't done we did, where did we do our prom at last year?
Mission Inn.
Yeah, Mission Inn. That's why it was so expensive last year. But previously in our other events, it's been around $5,000 or a little above that. But because we were having to raise the money by ourselves, it was a lot. I'm pretty sure a lot of money was borrowed here and there. But besides that, I see the difference from the class fees in there. The class fees has definitely allowed our officers last year to pay those expensive for prom, even though it was so expensive. But obviously the ticket sales helped a lot with that expense as well.
About how many kids go to a prom typically?
I'm sure.
Leesburg had 260 last year.
Right, and I'm sure it varies within school because each school has different policies, but like Leesburg, we allow our underclassmen to come as long as you're accompanied by an upperclassman, so that also allows us to boost some of our ticket prices and numbers as far as who attends.
Okay. Did somebody else? Yeah, I was going to say. You want to share with us?
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Have you all thought about any kind of incentives to get people to pay, or is that something you're going to leave to each
I'll open it up to you guys, but as far as Leesburg, I know, like at Tavares, I think they said they do it. We have a T-shirt that we provide as our incentive too. I know for our freshman class this year, when we did our freshman orientation, Mr. Randolph actually put out there like first 100 or so people that register for freshman orientation will get their class T-shirt. Like when they come for paying their class due, basically as being like, here's your present for paying your class due early, just an incentive. And then we also, a way to promote people to pay their class dues, like one of the other presidents said, we also do the policy of like, you can't come to prom or homecoming if you have that student debt as well. And if you guys have any comments on that.
All right, so last year I was the junior president for Eustis High School, and I was in charge with doing prom, and everything going on with COVID made it really difficult for us to raise money. Most of our fundraisers, which were down at the art festivals, down in Mount Dora for parking lots, most of those were canceled. So it was really hard, and we had to come up with new ways to raise money. One of the ways we did that was we reached out to a lot of Eustis alumni to donate money for banners. And we even got a person from the class of 1947 to donate. So that was actually pretty cool. We sent her a really nice thank you letter and some flowers. But yeah, prom was really difficult last year, and especially since we didn't have any class dues, it was really hard for us to raise money. And we had at Marina Del Rey, like Leesburg, it was 13 grand for the venue. And then my junior sponsor, she really likes to make things flashy. So if I don't know if any of you know Miss Way, but she's an awesome person. But our prom costed around 18 grand, which was a lot of money. But I was still very proud that we were able to do that. But it was a really difficult process. So that's why we're pretty much asking for these dues, because it is a struggle, especially since we don't have them to raise money, and I think it would be really beneficial. So.
How many people did you have at your prom? Ballpark.
I don't know the exact numbers. I would say around 250 to 300. Right. So, yeah.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to address the question? Mm-hmm.
Just to add on to kind of like the numbers perspective, so we sold 300 tickets, we were selling 300 tickets last year, and we sold pretty much all of them, but only about 150 showed up for prom. And I think that was mainly with COVID. I think people were kind of thinking about it, and but then just changed their mind, didn't want to go. Because we had ours at the pavilion here in Tavares, but we weren't allowed, we used the inside, but you weren't allowed to just stay in the inside, because if you wanted to dance or anything, you had to be outside for COVID and all that. And so that also just put a damper on things. Kids weren't too excited about that, I don't think. Personally, I did not go to prom last year, but that was just, anyways, that's besides the point. But we definitely did not make any money off of prom last year, so that also that also affected us for this year as well. So we have had to be really creative this year for fundraising, and luckily we did get quite a bit of our class dues paid this year, which is nice since we used the recommendation that's already being shown to you. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, do you guys have any further questions?
I do want to, I'm sorry.
Do you know what percentage of students pay class dues? Does anybody have any idea? As they are now, do you have any idea how many people pay them, or do you have a lot?
No.
I would say at Leesburg it's a significant majority, because like some of the other schools, you have to have your class dues paid before you can buy a ticket to homecoming. And this year we had around 600 students buy homecoming tickets.
Oh, wow.
So
That's awesome.
I would assume that they had to have paid their class dues. So, and then I do want to add on to the prom ticket. We profited. Lear told me $13 to $1,600 when we usually profit $5,000. So that's another.
Under your proposal, does everyone start over at the beginning of the next school year? Say I'm a freshman and I don't pay my dues. So when I become a sophomore, do I just pay my sophomore dues and move forward, or am I responsible? No? Okay, so what happens? Do I have to go back and pay my, I'm sorry. Can you not hear me?
There you go.
Okay. My question is, say I'm a freshman and I do not choose to pay my dues. When I become a sophomore, maybe I want to go to the homecoming dance. So I want to do that. Am I held accountable for any of the dues that I didn't pay the previous year? How does that work? So what happens to me? I mean, what do I have to do?
Our vice chair, Caitlin Blythe, who was not here for me to introduce.
As Denko said, I'm Caitlin Blythe. I represent East Ridge High School. As for East Ridge, your class dues follow you until your senior year. And when it gets to graduation, if you haven't paid any of those class dues, you don't get to graduate. So it's kind of like if you never returned a textbook, that follows you. So if you, let's say in your example, if you're a freshman, you're a sophomore, and you just choose not to pay any of those dues, that's just going to follow you until your senior year, until you go up to get your diploma. When they go over all your dues and they're like, oh, you haven't paid this, this, and that, you have to pay that before you can graduate.
But can I clarify, just, I don't know, I understood your question, I think, wrong, which maybe was my interpretation, but like, let's go back to Eustis High School. You have freshmen and sophomore and juniors that haven't had class dues, so they would just be responsible for starting. You're not going to have a junior next year that didn't have freshman class dues and didn't have sophomore class dues, but now has them and has to go back and back pay.
I would let Eustis answer that question because East Ridge has always had class dues,
Right.
so I don't know the perspective of that.
Okay.
All right, well, if we were to implement class dues, I'd say since we've never had them before, we shouldn't hold them accountable for the prior years since it is being brought upon them the first time. So I mean, they should really be held accountable because it's not like they were
Right.
not paying them.
Right.
So that's my take on that.
So that actually did happen to Leesburg. Like I said, my freshman year, we didn't have them, and then we started implementing them my sophomore year. And that's exactly what he said was just we weren't forcing like my class now to pay freshman dues because we didn't have them at that time.
But going forward, you would?
Right.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Wondering if your group had given any thought or consideration to what happens when you get a kid who comes forward and says, I can't afford to pay this. I have no alternative. I'm already on, free and reduced lunch, or my household income is such and such. What happens in those kinds of cases?
All right, so at Umatilla, we do have a lower income kind of society, and when we have students, because we have it a lot, they come up to us and they would say, I can't pay this, I have monetary issues, like at home, just financially I'm not stable. And that usually will just come out of our class account. So if they can't pay for it, it'll just come out of the class account. And if they are still wanting to go to homecoming or something, sometimes we have fundraisers for those type of students, or they can go to a sponsor and ask for the money, and it'll just come out of their class account. I'm trying to think. We had another system. Yeah.
Mr. Dodd, if I may.
Oh, sure.
I do remember in that proposed policy, there was a specific fee waiver for all types of fees. So under our recommendation, that fee waiver would also encompass this as well.
Yeah, because certainly Lake County is so diverse, right? And you have pockets of affluence and you have pockets of really struggling with low socioeconomic status. And so I'm just concerned about some particular high schools. If like 75% of your kids can waive the fee, then how does your SGA be able to put on these sorts of events? And where does that income come from?
Well, that would go back to it is possible because we did it for years, fundraising enough to make these events happen for students. It's just it's one of those things that's easier when everyone is available to, but in that situation, then it would have to be a fundraising effort rather than a class dues effort.
I can. Mr. Mathias, did you have any questions? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just want to make sure we're not overlooking you since we can't see you.
No. Oh, you can't see me?
Well, no, because we're looking at the presentation, not because your camera's messed up.
Okay. No. I really appreciate these students coming forward. So good work.
Okay. And I just want to, it's just a general comment, and I can see this just as a parent across multiple organizations where you have bands fundraising and choirs fundraising and classes fundraising and sports fundraising and boosters fundraising. And I just, thinking about what we went through to raise money in the same community that Mr. Baxley went through to raise money, to think about the other programs that are raising money, I just feel like this is a way that we don't tax a community that we know can be burdened too. And I feel like they've always risen up. Like, they have never let students down, but for me, it's more of a, let's take a little bit of that burden off, because so many groups are fundraising throughout the year for so many events.
I believe it was this board that said, that equated class dues to taxes. You might not necessarily use the fire department, but someone else does. So it's just a way to help everyone out and work for the greater good of your school community.
Are there any other questions on the class dues?
I felt like I had one, but it escaped me.
You want us to come back to it? Because you
Yeah, you
still have
can
to
come
do the
back to it.
dress code?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if you remember, we'll bring it back up. Is that
All
fair?
right, next slide, please. All right, what everyone in Lake County has been waiting for, some dress code revisions.
I got
he's
it.
got his
I got it.
question.
Came back
Okay,
quickly.
go
All right, so I got an email from one SGA advisor somewhere who said that they have not received a dime or a penny of any of the class dues that have come their way to put on these sorts of events. I guess we've got all the SGAs in the room right now. Is that true? Is there somebody who's not getting any of these class dues now to put on the events? No? Y'all are getting the funding.
Yeah.
Well, you have
He
no
doesn't
dues.
have any.
Right. And it wasn't even your school. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now it's time for what we've all been waiting for.
Now it's time.
Appreciate that.
Next slide.
So the purpose of us bringing this to the board is because many students in Lake County overall from all schools have asked for specific changes, and as their representatives, we feel it's important to bring them to your attention and see what all we seem is fair for the dress code.
So I'll start us off. There's just been a few changes that we have added to different sections here and there, starting with the head garments part. Under Part A, we recommend that it be changed to allow hats in observance of religions and prohibit any promotion of profanity, alcohol, or gang activity, just so your head garments, we wanted to make sure that the head garments weren't necessarily preventing people from expressing themselves religiously, but we also wanted to make sure that we still had that policy there to make sure that kids aren't coming in with absurd hats and things like that.
So this is also just a continuation of the Part A for the head. And to just, to continue from that, we wanted to include beanies. Skull cap? Okay, so never mind. I'm sorry. Skull caps is just another word for beanies. Sorry. Oopsie. So beanies, skull caps. Obviously, with winter conditions, things like that. Because we get so many cold days here in Florida. But when it is cold, allowing those things, and then also to prohibit them from being worn inside the school building, though, just so that, because sometimes they may be distracting or whatever, with safety reasons, things like that. So that's everything that we had for the head. Thank you.
So hold on. I learned something new on this. So there's a Florida statute that governs the idea about hats and sunglasses inside the school building. Is that true? Is that true?
Do you want to come up to the
Oh yes, but come to the so anybody watching at home will be able to hear your answer.
That's why we put in there that it would not be allowed to be worn inside.
Sure.
Because we went to a couple of our principals and we were like, hey, it's going to be winter, it's going to be cold. And he's like, well, it's heated inside, and you're not allowed to be wearing hats or sunglasses inside. So that's why we put.
Yeah, I saw the statutory reference, and that was a surprise to me. As many
okay.
times as
I'm
I've
sorry.
read.
I thought you were asking about
No,
it.
as many times as I've read that book, and the font is like this big. I guess you learn something new every time. So I did not know that. So okay, I guess my question is, I know there are so many schools and at all levels to do a hat day, as some sort of incentive. The statute still allows us to continue to do that, or is the statute going to squash any of that?
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Johnson, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I gathered when I looked into the statute was a protection for students, like when it's hot outside, to be able to wear sunglasses and
Okay.
things to protect them from the sun. That's what the statute was saying.
Oh, okay. The statute allows you to wear it to protect from the sun. It doesn't. The statute does not prohibit you from wearing it indoors.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
Don't you have it memorized?
I didn't have the sunglass statute memorized. I'll have to go back.
Which of you all are going to law school? This is great.
All right, so for the upper garments in Part A, we stated that that it should allow for shirts to have sleeves as short as 3 inches, while spaghetti straps are still prohibited. We agreed on the 3-finger rule, that's correct, on the shoulder, that allows it, because my secretary, she wore a tank top that was around 3 inches, and she wasn't allowed in the school. She came up to the door and they said, no, get out. So, yeah, so it's definitely been an issue for some of my friends that are girls, particularly, and they don't really wear spaghetti straps, but more the tank tops that are 3 inches. And another portion is that shirts may not contain vulgar language or images, obviously, because we don't want that. Next slide, please. And for portion B, includes examples of sleepwear that is prohibited. On here, we stated that students are not allowed to wear sleepwear, including onesies, nightgowns, robes, sleep sets, pajama pants, except for when approved by the principal for school events. So if there was a spirit week and the principal approved it for a pajama day, that would be allowed. But any other day, kids coming wearing onesies, that's not allowed.
And I do want to say that you'd be surprised on how often that has happened, people showing up in pajama pants and night robes.
I would not be
And then something else that I did not include in Part A on the slides was the all shirts must cover the midriff part as well.
All right. So for lower garments, we have Part B. Clothing must be worn appropriately and properly fastened with no tears that reveal undergarments or skin above the upper thigh. Because we know we have ripped jeans now, and they're very trendy, and we just want to be careful and modest with how girls and boys are dressing. Okay. And then, do you have any questions?
I do have a
Okay.
question. Just because
I figured you did. I could see it in your face.
Just because later on, not that I'm opposed. I'm just asking, okay, because later on lower thigh or mid thigh is defined.
Mhm.
Do we need to put a definition in here of upper thigh? Did you all come up with what that means?
I thought it said the crease. Did I read that where it said the crease?
So, okay, so you guys are talking about the dresses, skirts, and/or shorts, correct?
That's right, and I think that's where their definition of what mid thigh means.
Yes, so.
So I'm wondering what upper thigh means.
Upper thigh would probably be above mid thigh, or no? Am I?
It's above it. I just
Yeah.
wonder where.
I just.
That's a good
I
question
think it'd
because
be
they do have
everything above mid
holes.
thigh, correct?
So we left that one as is. For mid thigh is defined as while a student is in the standing position, measured halfway from the top of the leg, the crease that your hip makes, to the top of the knee. So the major change was that you were in the standing position from crease to knee, because sometimes when a young woman will sit down, the skirt changes.
Right. Of course.
I guess
So-
I know exactly what you mean. Listen, I have a middle schooler, and this is what I get most days. Hold on. She'll rip a piece of paper and stick it in front of one of her holes so that she covers up, but it's a hole that's like here. So that could be mid-thigh or upper thigh. So I don't know if it would be clear for a definition. So we don't have to put sticky notes in our
Is upper thigh like halfway between the mid thigh and the crease, or where is upper thigh? Sure. Right. That's.
Anything above that is upper. So there's not like a specific set point, it's just anything above.
I'm just concerned that when you get 40 different principals in the county saying this is upper thigh, this is mid thigh, I guess I just want them to all be consistent. I don't want somebody to get dress coded in one school when the intention of your group was to allow this particular garment. So I guess I just encourage maybe a definition of what upper thigh means. Yeah, because mid thigh is just so well defined in here. It tells you exactly how to find what that point is, and so I'm just wondering, is there a?
Yeah, I think it's a good concern. We understand. Thank you. Okay, so Can we move on to the next slide, or?
I'm sorry.
No, that's
No,
okay.
ma'am. I have a question about the holes.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. One of my many headaches when I was a principal
Mm-hmm.
was students would put pieces of paper between their skin and the hole. Are we going to state somewhere whether or not that's allowed, or are we just going to leave it up to the discretion of the administrator?
Well, we did put in that it would not reveal undergarments or skin, so I
Right.
guess technically it's not revealing any skin or undergarments if the paper is there. So I
Okay.
think that would be to the discretion of the principal.
So I honestly don't know what the difference would be. You know, some of the holes have fabric behind them, right? That they were designed that way. So what's the difference between fabric behind it or paper behind it? Paper is just a form of fabric, right?
Well, I don't know that paper is a form of fabric, but,
Your money is paper, but your money is also cotton and linen.
yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, well, it can become a problem. Because once you go past the paper, then you get the masking tape and the scotch. That young lady back there is shaking her head, she knows what I'm talking about. And sometimes it becomes, you know how if you have multiple holes, and then all of a sudden you got multiple sheets of paper underneath your pants? I just wondered if you guys had thought about that. I don't have a problem with it, I just think we need to clarify it, because I do know that in the past, that's not been acceptable. So I think if you're going to allow them to place something to cause the skin not to show, we need to make sure that all of our administrators understand that.
Yes, ma'am. And I do want to just point out that we are very open to your suggestions and your changes. We want to make sure that this dress code is something that the board will ultimately approve, and then something that the principals can and live with and enforce. And it is very nice to have Mrs. Cunningham as a former principal here with us. So, yes, ma'am, I do think clarifying and allowing would be, I think, the way of the group to allow people to do things like that.
Sticky notes in the car just for that.
So clearly it's already happening in your house.
Oh, it's happening.
It's happening everywhere.
It's happening.
We have a set of sticky notes in the center console for the one pair of jeans everywhere. Oh, Mom, get the sticky notes.
Yeah.
I guess I just struggle to see how different paper is from fabric.
Right.
I mean, if fabric is already
It's covered.
permissible there. then-
And for me, I think there's an implementation. I think what Mr. Dodd said speaks to it really well. There's some teachers that the minute the students walk in, they're looking at your dress code. And there's other teachers that don't. They just teach. And so I think that they try to manage what they're, any 6 periods a day, what that teacher's looking for. So to frame it out, maybe to be a little bit more consistent would be helpful. So they're not having, I don't know, that's a life skill, I guess, to manage what different people expect from you. But when it's related to your clothing all day long, it's kind of
Yeah.
tricky. So.
All right, so are there any more questions for this section? Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so
Good visual.
we wanted to redefine that baggy pants will be not allowed to be baggy at the waistline. We don't want any sagging, we don't want to see people's underpants, so we would like to suggest that baggy pants are allowed, just not at the waistline. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay.
Now, this one was something I really wanted, because I have a pair of pants like those sweatpants, and they're the most comfortable pants I own. But under the current dress code, they are out, but they still fit me at the waist, and they're not hanging off of me. So that's why redefining at the waistline was essential.
It was good. I like definitions. I appreciate y'all adding that one.
All right, are there any questions or concerns? Okay, next slide. And so we kind of went over this a little bit. Hemlines for dresses, skirts, and other shorts may be no shorter than mid-thigh. And then mid-thigh is defined as while a student is in the standing position, measure halfway from the top of the leg, the crease your hips make when you're seated, to the top of the knee. So it was when it was in a sitting position, and a lot of girls were having trouble with that because, as I said, this skirt goes to mid-thigh when I'm sitting, but some may take it as not acceptable in the dress code. So we wanted to do it as standing position. Any questions or concerns? All right, and then I think we are ready for the next slide. All right, So skin-tight recreation clothing, including bike pants, tights, leotards, and leggings, may be worn under shorts, dresses, skirts, or with a shirt that covers the pelvic area and buttocks. So previously, leggings were not included or allowed in the dress code, and we've had a lot of concerns and people asking to include them. All right. So that is
There's probably applause happening all across the room.
There might be. And this is kind of, I guess, piggybacking to my other question. Okay, so we've got all these recommendations, and let's say the board comes along and approves them. I guess I just wonder, what is the likelihood that we're going to get a SAC who's going to come in and say, well, we want to go stricter than the district-approved dress code, and does that end up circumventing the work that these kids have done and just bring us right back to the baseline?
So we had that discussion knowing that there was a waiver process for some schools to be able to amend the dress code. And we collectively agreed, which is why they each met with their principal and got their approval. We did have some feedback. Some of the changes that you're seeing today were made as a result of those conversations to say that we're not going to bring to the board those waivers as we typically have, that once this is approved by the board, this will be allowed for all students in all schools. And the only other waiver process is the typical SAC recommendations for school uniforms, which we've been honoring for a while. So.
Correct.
That's great.
All right, thank you guys.
Next slide, please. So the only changes that we made to the footwear section are in Part B, where we allow middle and high school students to wear flip-flops and sandals. Currently, middle school students are not allowed to wear sandals in any capacity, and from my understanding, middle school principals are typically pretty strict about that. But we do not believe that it poses any sort of safety concern or modesty concern.
Can I just ask what the rationale was to not include elementary? I'm just curious what the conversation was.
I don't know why we did
PE's like every day.
Was the main rationale for that one, because elementary school students are typically all at PE multiple times a week, or even sometimes multiple times a day. So them being outside in flip-flops or sandals might not have been the best approach. We could certainly revisit the sandals part, but definitely not flip-flops for elementary schoolers.
Plus recess.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I was just curious what the conversation was.
Are there any other questions about footwear? Slide, please.
So for accessories, the only change we've made is to include accessories that have spikes or other sharp objects in like the list of accessories that are prohibited. So for example, like I know at like Manila and Eustis, we were talking about like the dog collars and like spike chokers that were going on. So we want to prohibit that because that could also be a safety concern because we don't want anyone like on a collar leash going around. And then also to take out mood bracelets because that is a little ancient and I don't think people wear mood bracelets anymore, so we want to take that out. And so just taking out accessories that have spikes or sharp objects because of safety concerns. So just keeping like a necklace that I'm wearing like right now in the dress code. Thank you. Any questions?
We're both wondering why any mood bracelets were.
I wore those in middle school. I don't
Right?
know. What was the problem?
That's just something that changes color, right? That
Just curious.
you don't want people to know how you're feeling. I don't know. Sorry.
So the only change you will find in the discipline section of Part A is it states that the school administrators also have the authority to decide if the student is out of dress code. Yeah, currently it just says principal, so we wanted to include that school administrators had that authority.
Can I make a suggestion on the wording? I think it perhaps, in my opinion, would be better read if it said gives the principal or his or her designee. Because I just think that would be a better choice.
I like that kind of formatting would align with
with
most of
other
our
documents that we
policies,
have.
right, about having a designee.
Yeah.
Just semantics, but. Seems like it's already in practice.
Yeah.
Well, that is all of our changes to the dress code. It is, like I said at the beginning, a long time coming. We were so excited to bring this changes to the board. So are there any general questions? Any more?
Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Mathias.
Yeah, I'd like to ask one, and I wanted to listen to the whole presentation, but when it came to hats and shirts and logos or whatnot that you can have are prohibited, what about political statements?
So there was some discussion on that one as well, and we ultimately felt it would be best just left out of the dress code and to just not even wade into that issue on one side or the other about political views.
Yeah, so when we talked about it originally, we discussed that putting a restriction on that would kind of enforce the same idea of when we were restricting people's religions. If we would just say, like, you can't wear a hat that says I love Jesus on it, just the same way that says, like, a hat that says I'm a Republican. We didn't want to be the ones to tell somebody they could or couldn't wear that, just for the same reason of you don't want to get caught in the mix of seeming like you're trying to tell somebody which way to believe or what not to believe.
But this is a policy that you're proposing, and in a policy, it should be specific, yes?
Yes, sir.
That one of the things that we looked at, as you can tell, they obviously even dug down into statutes, and what we found in one of the Florida statutes is that that students have a right to be able to express themselves, and that would include those political views. So to have a policy that then prohibited would be a violation of state statute. So it's not currently in the dress code. We felt like it was already addressed through statute and was not necessary for us to specify in the dress code, and so we decided to leave that out.
Well done. Okay, somebody ought to get that statute to us. It's pretty.
We have it. We looked at it.
No, I know you did.
Well, I think that the statement under dressing and grooming that says, that refers to create disorder or disrupt educational programs, I think their political things could come under that, and that would still give the administrator or the principal or his designee the leeway to take care of that if someone wore something that was disruptive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only reason I think we would probably notice it or become upset by it, is if someone had on a shirt and it was causing a disruption. And they still have a statement that covers that.
And that was.
But what I just heard from the superintendent, though, is they're protected to be able to do that. Because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It may not be disruptive, obviously, to the person that's wearing it. It's
Right.
how the person that sees it.
Yeah,
You're
but
allowed to wear it. The principal would just have to address the disruption,
Correct.
address the behavior that, the
Caused
conflict
the
that resulted,
disruption.
but the students are allowed to wear it.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dodd's explanation is correct.
Okay.
I understand what he's saying, though. I mean,
Yeah, I do. Been there. I absolutely understand. But I think it's covered under, if it causes a disruption, then,
Or if it's vulgar, what if it's a vulgar statement? Do you, right, to wear vulgar. Right.
Yeah,
so
and
that's
that
where it's
is in there,
Right.
the profanity, any vulgar statements or anything with a disruption was already addressed in the code.
Well, were there any more questions, revisions, or suggestions? We're going to get you a definition on mid-thigh. Upper thigh,
Upper thigh.
excuse me.
I love this work.
Yeah.
I love this group, and this is I guess almost like seeing a dream come true. Thank you for being so open to these students and these ideas, and allowing this group to come together and making the recommendation to us, because I think this is what a school district should really all be about. I would love to hear from you so many more times on so many other issues. I think you've provided just a great diversity of opinions, and when you came together, you came up with something really strong. So I'm impressed with all of you. Thank you.
I appreciate your work with collaborating with your principals as well. So it's funny, as we're talking about some of these things that are a little bit more progressive, I'm thinking there's probably some teachers that are like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, right? But to hear that you have met individually with your principals and you've had this discussion and you have the support, it's such a strong piece of work. So I agree with Mr. Dodd. I'm sure I can speak for everybody on the board that we are so impressed with this group of young people, and we appreciate the work that you've done and the time that you've taken from your school day to come and visit with us, and we look forward to seeing you again. So, thank you guys.
Thank you.
To Mr. Dodd's point about wanting to hear from them more frequently, one of the, I think on our next agenda was what is our next project, and so if you have anything that you would like to have that student voice, you'd like for them to delve into a little deeper, bring back information to you, now's the time to share that information, or you can let me know, and whenever we meet, we can pass that along. They've got some ideas of things that they want to work on, but certainly are here to not only serve their fellow students, but us as a district and you as a board as well. So, and they are truly fabulous. So,
and I did hear them mention they were going to have some discussion around parking, which I think is one that is all over the place. Yeah. I don't even know where that money goes, so I'd be interested in hearing that. And yeah, so yeah. I know that's already on your horizon, but
yeah, I think they learned from the original discussion that there was a real lack of inconsistency on that particular topic, and so we're gonna do a little research, and then we'll bring you that recommendation as well. So,
all right. Okay.
So if y'all think of anything else, they're ready for some more projects. So thank you guys so much, and thank you to your principals for giving y'all time today to leave class and be with us today.
Great. All right, thank you guys. We are on to 3.02, our human resource employment screening recommendations. And I think we have associates from FADS here. Thank you for being with us this morning.
So if you'll recall at a earlier meeting or workshop, Mr. Farnsworth had asked the board if we could elicit the help of the great consultants available through the Florida Superintendents Association and look at some of our HR policies. And so these gentlemen are here today. They have spent some time meeting with staff, reviewing policy. And so I'll introduce to you Dr. Bill Vogel and Dr. Steve Busianus, who are here representing FADS and have a summary report for us today. So thank you both for being here. Thank you. And,
thank you so much. And I'm going to deviate a little bit before I get started, but thank you so much for having us on at a meeting where we could hear from those students. And I just want to say that it certainly is a best practice when you can have students meet on a regular basis and represent all the high schools. I know that's something that is really special, and not every school district does that. So that was very impressive. And they're really tackling some tough issues. And I thought I'd also add to that, living in Central Florida, I've observed what's going on in school districts right now because I'm no longer on the ground like Mrs. Cornegay is. But I feel that Lake County has done a superior job in managing all the challenges of COVID. You've really kept the focus on instruction. Your one-on-one Chromebooks initiative is very impressive. Your graduation rate is on the move. It's increasing to levels that you've never had before. I think passing that half-cent sales tax, and your new schools are beautiful, and the growth here is really phenomenal. Building your fund balance and your insurance trust fund, your expansion in career tech areas, you all are doing some phenomenal things here in Lake County. And it really takes an outstanding superintendent and a board. This is the toughest time to be in the positions that you all are in right now. And building the leadership team you have, it's really been a pleasure. And we're very honored to be able to come and work with Mr. Farnsworth and his team. So I thought I would start with that. I'd also like to introduce our team. We have three on our team that we're representing FADS. Steve Busianus has vast experience in HR in 2 school districts. He specializes in areas such as teacher allocations, salary schedules, class size, fingerprinting. He's been a chief negotiator, so he brings all those skills with him to work, but he's also very current on policies. We work in quite a few school districts. He and John Reichert, who can't be with us today because of a family illness, they have trained the new superintendents for more than 12 years. And we're working with a lot of districts now. Steve and John and myself, we've worked in more than the majority of school districts in Florida. John Reichert, who couldn't be with us, is really an expert on professional standards, on the application process. He's brought a lot of technology to HR departments. He mentors current HR people, and he works very closely with other organizations doing searches. Prior to the time I was superintendent for 16 years in 2 school districts. I worked in HR and labor relations, and I'm still a chief negotiator. I guess I never could get that out of my system. I represent the school board in 1 district in Florida, so that's kind of our background. Overall, we were very impressed working with Chad and also Mr. Myers with what they did. We were here on 2 occasions working on site, and then we did a lot of research ourselves. You all have some things which we'll talk about that other districts are not doing in HR in your screening process, but we do have a series of recommendations. So we're going to go ahead and start with Steve. We're going to go ahead through the observations and recommendations and answer any questions you all might have.
Okay.
Steve?
Thank you, Dr. Vogel. And before we get started, Mr. Dodd's comments echoed the way I felt. You probably can't see with my mask on. I was grinning from ear to ear watching that presentation. And as the former junior class sponsor of Fort Pierce Central High School many years ago, that was the first class to go outside the school campus for a prom, when they were talking about this, it just made my heart warm. So thank you very much. Boy, it's nice to brought back some fond memories. So keep up the good work. I agree with the superintendent. It's great to get their input. I mean, that's what the education process is all about. So we'll get back into this. I'm sorry about that. As Dr. Vogel mentioned, I'm a 38-year veteran of Florida schools. Spent 19 years in St. Lucie County and 19 years in Seminole County. It's really an honor to come to the school districts. I believe Lake County is county number 31 that we've been to out of 67 through the years for various reasons. This time, of course, it's hiring and applicant screening. We've done things on, as Dr. Vogel mentioned, class size, teacher allocations, and the like. So it's really rewarding to go to other school districts and find out what they're doing to kind of pat yourself on the back in terms of some of the things you're doing. Because some of the things here with screening, we have not seen in other school districts, in many other school districts. For example, I know on your website you have hiring procedures for new applicants. You'd be surprised how many districts don't have that information. They have to call up HR to find out, well, what happens if my fingerprints don't clear and this type of thing. So you'll see, and I'm sure you've seen already, we have kind of taken what you've done already, kind of expanded it a little bit based on our background knowledge. So if I can, let's jump right into the observations and recommendations from our report. And I know the board knows many of these things, but we'll just tell you what we've recommended in terms of some of these procedures that you have. First of all, the first recommendation is that your criminal background check committee should keep an ongoing record of decisions made on each case. Now, why is that? Of course, it makes sense. If Mr. Farnsworth is not there and there's a new person or there's new board members, that way there is a chart or something that's going to, a record that's going to say, here's how we handle these particular cases. In addition, for any applicants who have been before the CBC and received a favorable decision regarding approval for employment, we felt the district should consider providing those applicants with a letter that clearly defines any conditions that must be met by the applicants related to their approval for employment. Letters of this nature should also provide clear directives and/or expectations related to the professional standards that will be expected of the applicant at the time of their employment and beyond. Also, we felt like the HR department should be commended for the training they've provided the CBC committee members regarding FDLE training and the district's efforts to convene the full committee when possible. So they're doing it's a good process that you have. And again, some of the recommendations that we're going to make are just going to basically give you some more flexibility on that particular area. Next recommendation, the hiring guidelines that are currently provided on the website could be modified as outlined in Appendix A. You'll see that we took that, added some detail in it, but we felt like if you're going to post that on the website, try and answer every question that could come forward. So that's Appendix A. Mr. Reichert really kind of took that on himself and kind of expanded what Mr. Farnsworth actually had on the website. Dr. Vogel.
Thank you, Steve. One of the things that the districts enjoy having are volunteers. And there are different levels of background screening required of volunteers. And so what we're recommending is that the website clarifies the background clearance that is required for each volunteer level. For example, if there's a classroom volunteer, then that person would need just a level 1 background clearance. However, the statute requires a level 2 background clearance if the person is going to be a coach. And so we recommended that be clarified. And I know Mr. Farnsworth is working with the volunteer people to go ahead and go back and make sure. What's confusing about this is someone might start as a classroom volunteer, and then they might then decide to take on a coaching responsibility, and so tracking that could be somewhat of a challenge. So also then on number 5, your policy states that all volunteer coaches, as I said, must have the level 2 clearance. So I know they're doing a check on that to make sure that that's the case. On number 6, individuals who are employed and who serve as lay coaches, and in Lake County, the lay coaches are the coach only or the coaches that are paid. Those individuals must hold a Florida state-issued coaching certificate, or they have to have their regular teaching certificate. Now, Florida statutes, though, exempts an athletic coach who voluntarily renders service as a coach from the certification requirement. So all of that, Mr. Farnsworth is working with your volunteer people to make sure that those are all in order. Yes.
I've got kind of just a
Sure.
question of clarification.
Sure.
So sometimes somebody might go through the volunteer process and maybe it comes back that they're ineligible for level 2 clearance, right? And so they're going to do level 1. This reference to the CBC in the point 1 here, is that just for employees or is that volunteers too? Are there volunteers who might go through that process? And so we'd obviously keep, yes, okay, so we'd obviously keep records for the volunteers as well to understand
Yes.
their approval or denial.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's right. Okay, Steve, you're going to talk a little bit about some of the rest.
Yes. Yes. Item number 7, we are recommending that professional development be provided to the HR department, the employee relations department, as well as principals and APs that would pertain to any procedural changes that might take place in terms of your staffing process, so everybody's kept up to speed. And I'm sure that that'll happen anyway, but we wanted to make sure that was recommended. Number 8, it is recommended that policy modifications identified within Appendix B, and we've identified the policies, it's your screening policies for support staff, administrators, and instructional staff, be revised as indicated and eventually submitted to the board for approval. But at this point, I need to kind of put a little disclaimer. We know springtime, it's legislative session time. I've been tracking, and I wanted to make sure I had up-to-date information. There are a couple of bills pending right now that deal with background screening, which I was surprised to see. I thought background screening is background screening, but we're going to continue to monitor it. And what we would urge at this point, we wanted the board to see what we had recommended as far as potential board policy changes, but we will come back. We've talked to Mr. Farnsworth, we've talked to the superintendent. We'll be happy to come back and tinker with our recommendations if they need be based on recommended legislative changes. But we know too, springtime, Mr. Farnsworth will be going to the negotiators meeting. I know you'll have superintendent meetings. They're going to get bombarded with changes legislatively, so we'll all hear the same information. But we wanted to make sure that we continued our work for Lake County by adjusting any recommendations we might need based on legislative changes.
I think one of the key issues with that is normally a probationary employee does not have the right to a due process hearing. But there's some legislation that suggests that they might have to have that. Your policy had that in there, and that was the issue at stake right now. And I think, of course, Mr. Johnson would work with that, but that was our recommendation regarding that. The other policy that we looked at.
Excuse me, Chairman.
Yes.
May I ask a question? Yes. So we use Neola, and they are the ones that maintain these policies. And you work statewide. So would these not be made at that level? So we're interjecting your recommendations into a policy that Neola covers for multiple districts in the state. Why wouldn't Neola be looking at this? I guess I'm asking it to the chairman.
Oh.
I'm asking it to the superintendent. I'm sorry.
Right.
I know you asked early on if we were working with Neola, because many of the districts that you all work with are also Neola districts. And so certainly, as with any of our revisions, they do look at them. But most of these are legislatively driven, and I'm not sure the recommendations that you made I think we're just kind of inserting some of the practices we already had in place into policy. And so it certainly doesn't change the intent of any of the policies, so I don't think that there would be any conflicts with Neola. But certainly, as they're saying, until this legislative session ends, if any of these policies are impacted, of course, we get that information directly from Neola, so we'll just have to work with them to make sure that we incorporate it in the suggested language. But again, it doesn't change the intent of the policy, so I don't believe there'll be any conflicts.
And I would agree with you, Superintendent. What the other changes that we made were really more technical changes that really wouldn't be impacted by Neola anyway. One, for example, the administrators. And then the staff picked up on it at the same time we did. When we looked at the policy, it said the fingerprints had to be paid by the employee, and actually the 5-year renewals are paid by the district. The other two policies had already been changed for instructional staff and support staff. That was really just a technical change. The other one was more of just cross-referencing your board policies. We just cleaned up that language. So the only one that really is in question right now is what Dr. Vogel talked about before, about the probationary. And you're exactly right, sir, that the Neola, I'm sure, if there are changes, drastic changes that are made, everybody's going to be on board, and I would assume that maybe your contracts with Neola would come forward and say, yep, this was changed legislatively, you need to change this board, because that's what we would expect them to do.
Yeah.
But one of the intents of us going with Neola was that we would not have to do all of this inserting a different language, because they don't maintain that, we do. So prior to Neola, we controlled our board policies, and now inserting, they're not going to have a comment about our insert, that they're only dealing with the part that they provide. So each time we have to remember that we changed a policy or inserted language that is not part of their structure. That's my only concern.
Okay. Point taken.
On number 9, again, we don't have a recommendation on number 9 because there is pending legislation that could definitely change the ability of public comment. So we don't have a recommendation on it this time. The only caution we would have, and we would refer this to Mr. Johnson, is depending on the nature of the situation, if someone could be pending a quasi-judicial hearing before the board, the attorney might have to make a decision on what sort of discussion should go on. But that's something that we have to see what the legislation is going to do on that. And when you finally get that legislation, you might want to consider putting what you use for public comment in a board policy, but that would be something that you work with Neola on and Mr. Johnson.
And recommendation number 10, again, we wanted to compliment the HR department for a very detailed step-by-step process by which the hiring process is conducted. I know Dr. Vogel and Mr. Reichert met with the HR staff, and they reviewed this hiring process, and the HR department actually added 2 additional steps to the process that they were doing, and they wanted to make sure that it was in writing. Again, that's Appendix C, and again, compliments to Lake County and the HR staff for having a printed step-by-step hiring process that can be followed. And that basically are our recommendations.
What was really, I think, very positive about this review was we did it in collaboration with Mr. Farnsworth and his team. And as well as we were working on it and doing our research, his team was also doing the same. And as Steve said, they came up with some ideas, too, that they could insert in their hiring guidelines as we were pulling together this process. So we're very happy to answer any questions that you might have. But again, thank you so much for the opportunity to work with you. And one thing about us is everyone has our cell phone numbers and our emails and texts, so we're always available if we need any follow-up questions or have any other questions.
Okay. Board members?
Yeah, I've got some questions. And one is that I was really pleased to read this hiring process outline here. This is a document that you've already got in place in your department. And
we've got.
So.
We had one that.
Can you? I was going to say, Mr. Mathias, can you come on up, Mr. Farnsworth?
Good job.
We had a document outline, but that would not be visual and open to the public. It's more of an internal piece. And what we did was we went through that and got way more specific on what was existing. And we added some pieces in. You'll see like if there's some parentheses with new in there. And we connected some pieces where in the past, where we were looking at criminal backgrounds, double checking to make sure that people are accurately disclosed on their applications when they were initially applying, versus also if there's things going on with certification at the state level when we check the certifications. So we're just making sure that all hands are being held at this point and communicating from one to another on that. The revisions to the hiring guidelines that you see in the appendix is a reorganization and more detailed approach, like he's saying. So any question that could be asked can be answered pretty much from there, unless somebody gets like way obscure and deep in the weeds. We have that ready to go and to activate on our website today. We're waiting for this meeting to occur to make sure there was nothing else or additional tweaks we wanted to do before we click the button on that today. Mr. Zamora, he has other stuff going on this morning, but he's ready to do that as soon as we get past this part.
Yeah, I do like that when you've got a written process or SOP. I know Tom, if he was still in the room, he'd be kind of cheering because he's always talking about SOPs. But then it doesn't depend on who answers the phone. That it's going to happen the same each time. And I guess I would just, I don't know to what extent other departments have gone, or for what other process you have such detailed processes. But I think this is a good benchmark to kind of start looking at other processes to figure out, do we do that the same every time, or does it depend on who's working that day?
You're right.
So I like that. A couple of questions I did have about the processes is that, and I think somehow randomly in Lake County, we seem to get all these oddball sort of situations that I don't know if they're occurring in other places, but they seem to find us. And one was we had an employee apply at one point who had sanctions on a certificate in another state, right? But didn't use that certificate for reciprocity, used another state where there were no sanctions, and so I guess my question is, through this process, do we look at or make some recommendations, or do we have now in our process outlines about figuring out all these out-of-state certificates that an employee might have and checking all of them instead of just relying on, hey, I've got reciprocity here, we're good.
Unfortunately, there are some aspects we have to rely on accurate and honest disclosure on the application. There is some kind of national database we can run things through, but it's depending on other states being a participant in that registry and submitting things timely and things like that. So it's really just doing a large amount of research in the background as much as we can and hope that we don't get hit with something that's extremely obscure. I will tell you, just speaking with other districts, it's just as crazy as it is here, especially with a very interesting pool to draw from at this point with labor shortages. I was at a meeting last week with probably 30 to 40 other districts, and they're expressing similar concerns and backgrounds. But at least the state is moving in the right direction. Some of the legislation will move to include non-instructional also. That's being proposed. And I think really everybody talking to one another, just like we're trying to do here in our district, so we're not just handing people off from one district to one district like we've talked about in some of our conversations.
Yeah, and I know it gets challenging. Let's say you get an applicant who taught in Hawaii and Alaska, right?
Yeah.
And they might not even mention that they taught in Hawaii where they've got sanctions, and then they say, hey, look, I've got a teaching certificate from Alaska. I'm going to come teach for you. But I guess and we would never know that, right, unless we really do some digging. But if they've disclosed that they taught in Hawaii, even if that's not the certificate they're using from reciprocity, then perhaps, maybe it might be incumbent on us to add to our procedures that we're gonna look at Hawaii's database if it's public or whatever. I don't know. I just picked two random states. I don't know. but if it is, like Florida's database is just so easy, anybody from the public can go look at it, right? So if there's a state that we can look at, even if they didn't disclose it, I just wonder if it wouldn't be worthwhile on our part to check it.
I need to talk to my certification team and see exactly what avenues and how much states are participating in in that. So like I say, if it's possible for a stone to be turned over, we'll turn it over to figure out whether they have had some issues.
I'd like to support that comment by Mr. Dodd, and I just think it's really important that we screen our people as best as we can and not wait for legislation to force us to screen them in a different way is kind of what I'm hearing. So if we can, if it's in their resume that they worked at this state and this state and this state, maybe we just contact those states and pull their certificates from all three states or whatever it is, Hawaii and Alaska. Because Florida is very transient, and that's just a characteristic of Florida. So it would be good to anticipate it.
Along the lines of certificates, and where this especially gets kind of hairy and dicey, is somebody who's on a district certificate, right? So if and this is a process I'm still trying to completely understand. So if let's say you got a state issued certificate and you go out and get a DUI, you're going to have some sanctions associated with that on your certificate. Maybe there's a fine with that. Maybe you've got some sanction that you're not allowed to transport children. So on and so forth. But if you're on a district certificate, do you escape sanctions?
I did find in statute where we're authorized to sanction a district certificate. We haven't ever exercised a mechanism or the necessity to do that. So I think that's where we've got to put some plans in place. Okay, if this does arise, how will we handle it? And a lot of times imagine if there's some significant issue, we're going to revoke our district certificate from someone who's. But if they get involved, say in some sort of misconduct, then that's going to become. I mean that's something The only thing you would really be revoking a district certificate for is if they were involved in some misconduct, which would also, impact them adversely, if found through due process as their employment as a whole. So I think it's important, just if someone is being discharged from employment, that we include that in the documentation, that we are also revoking their Lake County district certification.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to look at what that consistency looks like, and sometimes it might be challenging if we've got a district issued certificate. Maybe there's not a necessarily we haven't had a state certificate with the same sort of offense or sanctions. How do we ensure that we would treat that equally? But I know when we jump on the state database, and you can look at the history of Lake County, and I can find people for decades. I've seen the history, and if you taught in a classroom on a state certificate, you get these sanctions. But if you're on the district, you escaped them. And I guess I just want to make sure that these people understand that there are some consequences for their actions too.
Good point.
I went to the database and went district by district, and it's a bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, sure.
Especially if you're like in the HR nerdy work. So I got into it, and I'm going through every single district, looking at trying to develop a sense of consistency. And what you see is, because they're aligned chronologically, how you can tell from one commissioner to another, from one leadership team in the state to another, there's different sanctions that they've gone from stringent to lenient to stringent to lenient. And for the most part, you can chart a flat line eventually, but it's one of those things where we have not dealt with that. We came close, I think, with something that could deal with that, but like I said, it would be an investigation as a whole, not just for certificate purposes.
Right. So I guess trying to understand this district certificate a little bit better. When we issue one in our district, and let's say this person has created some sort of offense, we're going to let you go, or maybe they've resigned, but maybe it's something that normally would have resulted in sanctions if that were a state certificate. Can I take that Lake County certificate and go teach in another district? That I'm going to have to go to Orange County and say, hey, okay, I'm going to go through this process. So how does Orange County find out about, hey, Lake sanctioned your Lake certificate? How would they find that out?
I'm not sure they would, because there's not truly a mechanism for them to find that out. So I think that's where we're not necessarily waiting on the state to tell us what to do, but there just has to be a mechanism in order for somebody to do that. Because vice versa, how do we know somebody coming from Orange County, right?
Precisely. So I guess thinking about from the state level, maybe you all have some influence on that. Is there a way to add a subset of the database, or could we advocate for that, hey, if you've got a district certificate, Lake can go ahead and record that you've got sanctions, so now somebody going to Marion County or Polk or Austin, wherever they're going, would know that.
I think you raise a very good question. My question, I would think, Chad, that in the case of Mr. Farnsworth, they'll probably refer the person to professional practices services.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you did that, then they would have some record of it.
And I can tell you, coming out of this session, it appears we'll be reporting, just treating them just like non-instructional, where they're adding to the list that they have expectations for. But are they thinking in Tallahassee all the way thoroughly and not missing out on the group, right?
Right.
But thank you for bringing that up. That's a real good point.
Well, we only know because it happened here in Lake County.
Yeah.
Well, because substitutes are a whole nother
That's right.
ball of wax, right?
That's right. The other question I had about was how do we create some consistency on let's say applications? Okay, so in our policies here, we've got some processes that if we recognize that an applicant has falsified their employment application or failed to disclose their sanctions, that they're no longer going to be considered for that position. But if you've escaped that, let's say we don't find out about it. Now you're employed, you're working. Now you as an employee, if you falsified your application, you could be subject to discipline up to and including termination. So you might not, we might just say, hey, don't do that again. Here's a little reprimand. Have a nice day. Or we may fire you for that. I guess my question is, how do we create that consistency of what got you fired versus what gets you,
Well, and I think that lends back to where we had supporting documentation and a sign-off on somebody that went through the criminal background committee. Now we're tracking the results from each instance, and we've improved additional documentation and a notes page that goes along with that. So because before you look in a file, you might find some random notes, but now we have notation for why the decision was made and what we do through that process. And also, if there is, like they mentioned about the letters and the communication to the people that participate in the process, we have already begun those processes. And for instance, if someone failed to disclose, let's say, a bad check from 20 years ago, and perhaps they didn't even realize that was a criminal offense, and something went on in the course that they were not even aware of, perhaps, then that wouldn't be something that, even if we wanted to try and terminate them, we'd be able to do that. But if we have not hired them yet, we've got a letter in place that actually you would possibly receive a written reprimand prior to being employed that establishes, hey, this is documented that there was miscommunication on your application. However, we don't feel like it is something that would disqualify you from employment, and we're going to allow you to move forward. But this is a moment in time that's going to be recorded in your personnel file. And obviously, once they become an employee, you've got collective bargaining agreements that come in and dictate your discipline and due process after that. However, if we ever get in a situation where we have to terminate someone and it's being contested for something on a similar grounds, we'll have that document in place for a DOA judge or for you guys or whoever is making a determination to say, okay, this was an issue at one time, so we're going to take this into account through our proceedings.
Yeah, I guess I'm just really trying to think about let's say a falsified application, all right? So you don't disclose sanctions. We've hired somebody or fired somebody for that in the past. Embellishing experience that didn't get them fired, that somebody's dates didn't line up by about 10 years on reported experience. I get that, okay, if somebody is off by a couple months on when they work someplace, okay, you can kind of chalk that up as an honest mistake, right? But I think when you get to the realm of 10 years, that gets me a little level of discomfort there. So would that be terminable? Like, I'm just wondering what the standards are and, how we arrive to those to ensure that we're,
Well, I think the examination of each situation is what's going to be key, and looking at the rationale, giving their person an opportunity to provide some type of rationale or explanation. And we're going to have to just really scrutinize it and look at it from a committee standpoint, or if it's just through employee relations, if it's misconduct, or to weigh it out. I don't think you're going to be able to develop a point system or some type of exact, uniform way. I think your process can be uniform, but weighing one person's situation against another, they are so different, every single personnel situation, that would be virtually impossible.
Mr. Dodd, one comment on that.
Sure.
Working with Ms. Cornegay and Mr. Farnsworth, they have a very high standard and expectation. But what happens when a new superintendent comes in, there's a new standard in place. So sometimes you're dealing with situations that someone's been on board in the past and there was a different standard of acceptance. So I think that's really important. But what we've always said, I see Mr. Johnson looking, that when a new superintendent comes in and a new team and a board, that I've always found resets the standard, even on cases that we've had to go through. Well, they said in this case, past practice, 10 years ago, you didn't do this. So I really feel that, that's what you will see that in working with this team.
Yeah, I certainly recognize that so much of this becomes subjective, right? And because it's difficult to write an operating guide for something that's not a machine that's going to behave exactly the same every time, or that you do have situations that are all just so very different. I guess that's why you've got so many things, so many incidents that go through employee relations to try to kind of vet out what have we done in the past, I guess, from past practice, or what warrants a level of.
I think we've kind of gone through a recalibration, right? And since our team came in and worked with Ms. Cornegay, we inherited a certain benchmark of standards, and, you know, just hopped right in, and we're following that blueprint, right? And then all of a sudden, the world's evolving around us, and we recognize there needs to be a change and some updating. And I think that's what's occurred now. And what I've learned from these guys is, okay, it's okay if you see a different standard. If the situation's called a task and there's a different standard, people will understand at the juncture that there was a change in leadership, and the bar was raised, and we're holding folks to a much higher standard than we were in the past.
And I can certainly appreciate a high standard, and I think a lot of the recommendations around the record keeping is going to be very helpful. You know, I guess, you know, if I had to pick one other bit of surprise to me, I guess through statutory language, is that, you know, a school board can reject an applicant for just cause, right? They don't meet the minimum qualifications, or, you know, there could be, you know, maybe some other examples of reasons that we would not approve their hiring. But the school board can't just fire an employee for just cause, right? That's got to be staff. And so, you know, I guess, you know, sometimes you feel a little helpless, I guess, in that process, you know. And so that's where I just wonder if there's a standard of what we're going to allow an employee to resign for, or if there's a standard of what we're going to terminate an employee for, and as much as you can possibly define that, I think that would be good. I mean, I think the one that probably challenged me the most was when I read a number of witness statements from an employee who made death threats against the board, and we allowed that person to resign. And I go, what? I read these statements. I'm not okay with this. But, you know, we as a board, we don't get to decide. You're fired. You know, so do you just go teach, or do you go work somewhere else and not disclose that you resigned, you know, what the conditions were? So that's where I guess I just wonder, you know.
Is that in statute? I thought that was a preference.
You do, it is in statute that you have the option to allow someone to resign in lieu of termination. We have that authority, and those aren't just willy-nilly decisions. Those are something we're going to take into consideration with counsel and our attorneys, and look at weighing out what's our best option here. Because a lot of times if someone chooses to resign in lieu of termination, they forfeited their rights to an appeal. And there's several reasons that that's more appealing to us at times. But
ultimately, isn't it a choice of the, I thought the board did have the right to fire for good cause. That was my understanding.
I mean, at the end of the day, you wind up board approving every termination in the district.
But like when 9.01 comes before us and we see John Smith on there for resignation in lieu of termination, we can't just make an amendment and say, I move that John Smith be terminated, right? So, I mean, that's not our call.
I thought we could.
Right? Can we? How does that work?
Those
I asked Steve on this one.
Those things are on your agenda because there's an agreement to do that. That person has waived their right to have an appeal, which can be either in front of you or in front of a DOA hearing officer, but they waived that right, and they're resigning in lieu of that. So you can't come back at a meeting and say, well, no, one person say, I want to move not to allow this person to resign. You can certainly take the position that you're not going to allow former or soon-to-be former employees to resign in lieu of being terminated and exercising those rights. But, I mean, you can't go back.
Then there's consequences.
Right. There's a reason, as Mr. Farnsworth was talking about, that would be something that we would be interested in pursuing for, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, not the least of which is cost and money of being able to, rather than go through expensive process of a DOA hearing officer, go ahead and take a resignation from the person, and that eliminates all those other rights.
Right. I understand the administrative consequences either way of that. But my question is, we as a board, though, we couldn't decide, hey, we think this guy should be fired. We couldn't even have that discussion.
No, you have to vote on the superintendent's recommendation.
That's right.
The superintendent has the authority to make recommendations regarding those issues.
That's right. So what I'm saying
But we
is
can
that we as
vote
a board-
against it and recommend that she recommend firing. That is something that is within the purview of the board. Is that correct, Mr. Johnson?
Purview of the board is whether to accept or reject the superintendent's recommendation. And if they reject it, then they have to have good cause to reject it. They can't just decide, well, we're rejecting all of those today.
Yeah,
And the superintendent
that's in the
makes that
statute.
recommendation.
Right, but we do have the right to fire
With
people
cause.
based on, with cause.
With cause.
And I think Mark is talking about a situation that there is
With cause to ignore
So-
the superintendent's recommendation to do something with that employee and do what you want to do instead, you have to have cause to do that.
All right, then I think I got bad legal advice at that time, because I specifically called and talked to you about this one, and that you said that I had no recourse on this one, that it was, this board only has the ability for the hiring decisions, not for the firing decisions on that one. And so I let it go. It was resignation in lieu of termination, and to this day, I'm still.
I don't understand the situation. I mean, that hasn't changed. I mean, there's a case that we've used a couple of times that talks specifically about the need to be able to have the superintendent's recommendation come before you, and the need for you to approve the superintendent's recommendation on employees unless there's good cause to do something differently.
Yeah, I think that, Mark, where you're getting a little bit confused is we're actually looking at the superintendent's recommendation. We're not individually responsible for employees. The superintendent is.
Right.
And so if the
I'm not
superintendent makes
confused.
that recommendation, then there's some statutory specific benchmarks that have to be met for us as a board to overrule her. We just can't arbitrarily do that.
Oh, no,
Right.
I totally get that. I'm not confused, but this is the exact question I had for Steve when this employee was coming before us. There was a resignation in lieu of termination. I said, is it not? There are some possible just cause to fire this employee, given we have like half a dozen witness statements saying that this person was making death threats against the board members.
Mm-hmm.
And
But
we
that
allowed
would be up to
person
the
resign.
superintendent.
What's that?
No, it's
It would be up
not.
to, yes, the superintendent would make the recommendation to terminate.
That's right.
Yes,
You'd have
but
to go to the reasons that you're really overriding the superintendent's
Yes, and
recommendation.
so that's it.
That's where we don't deal individually. It's the superintendent's recommendation is what you would have had to find just cause.
He's saying he had just cause and that he felt like it should have come to the board with that the in lieu of termination wasn't good enough and that the board should have rejected in lieu of termination and said that we should terminate. And we do have that right to do that.
With just cause.
But we had
And
just cause
Yeah, but
in that
don't-
situation.
I know
Having
exactly
just
the
cause
situation
is a
he's talking
judicial
about, and I don't know that we did.
determination Ultimately, not board.
Well, I
determination.
can't answer whether or not death threats are just cause. I thought they were.
It's a death threat, but the guy had no capacity to pull it off. That's what was determined.
So, yeah, so I don't know.
honestly
I
don't
can't speak to
remember
that. I just know
talking
if we
about
do have
death
just
threats,
cause.
So
Yeah, that was, we talked a long time on that one. Okay. I don't know. We'll just have to park that one. I was just wondering, I was just observing that it seems strange to me that there's such a vehicle in place for us to reject hiring for just cause. But I don't think that process is nearly as clear when it comes to employee firing. You know, and so that really has to originate from staff to decide to fire. So.
Chairman, could I ask a couple of questions of Mr. Farnsworth?
Yes, of course.
One was, and I never heard before, Chad, the idea that if someone comes in, a change, I think, to your SOP, if it's found that they weren't truthful on their application, are you saying that they can then, that we will put a letter in their file when it's determined?
If
This
there's
is prior to
something
employment.
We've already started, I can tell you, we've had people that the frequency is pretty decent, that they wind up not checking a box correctly. And if it's something light, then it's something we can consider, and they can start their career with us with a written reprimand, but that's documented and signed off on. But I can tell you, we haven't seen many light circumstances. So we've been in the process of denying folks to where what we're doing now is when we go through the criminal background committee and look, the first thing we do is check to see if they accurately check the boxes, and we put in new alerts there's no way they can deny that they didn't know that what they were supposed to do. So if it is a circumstance, like I said about the bag check from 20 years ago that there was a court record on, that would be something we would allow them to start with a reprimand. If it's, I was arrested for a pot possession last year and I didn't disclose it on my application and it flags, no, we're just telling you thanks, but no thanks.
Here's my problem, is if someone comes on board, and let's say the 20-year incident, and they just didn't remember it or whatever, you're starting this employee out with a reprimand right off the bat that you can use later, you said, to build a case.
Well, it would be a moment
I
in time.
just think that's odd way to approach a brand new employee coming on board, starting their first day at work with a reprimand. That just seems weird to me.
It just would not be, it wouldn't go undocumented. So at this point, it's documented. I don't think it's a document that's necessarily purely for the intent of coming after them later, but it's something that's documented that, hey, you know, we told you that this was an issue at this point and that it wasn't something that would impact. Because what you have is if people have a situation like if they didn't disclose that bad check and they're going to be a PE teacher, that's probably not going to be something that we're extremely worried about. And if they provide good rationale of why that was not there and the age and the possible court documentation that goes behind it, we examine all those things and look all the way through it. We just don't want to purely say, nope, can't come in because this happened. And then there are times that it's a purely a mistake, but we're not willing to say, it was just a mistake. The fact is they did not disclose whether it was a mistake on their part or not, and we want that documented and established.
I think that documenting it is one thing and absolutely appropriate. I think calling it a reprimand prior to, the first day you get a reprimand, just doesn't seem, it's not congruent with good employees or good, you know what I'm saying?
I think not all letters would be, that documentation would not be the same for every single person. If it's something that it was, I ran over that box and missed it, perhaps. Because what you'll have is perhaps somebody checked off that they had a criminal background and then they missed something that would be obvious, like adjudication withheld or something like that. So it's just looking at the different layers of it. We would document to the particular situation that exists. If it's something that warrants a reprimand, then so be it. If it's something that we're not considering them, we document that. And if it's something to where we just need to make a moment in time that they did not check the box correctly, we'll just document it that way, and it wouldn't necessarily be a reprimand.
If someone starts their career with us right off the bat with a reprimand, they probably shouldn't be with us. Documenting that someone checked the box incorrect is one thing, and you guys do the evaluation. But if it rises to the level where you think that you're going to issue a reprimand, then that's our chance to stop that employee right then from coming on board, because then firing them is a whole nother set of rules, right?
Well, anyone that they would be on a year probation anyway, so we could discharge them on probation with just cause regardless. And I think having that as a process in place for our HR procedures allows us some flexibility. I'm not saying that's something that's going to be exercised a whole lot, but it's something that we saw where other districts were participating in that didn't seem like a bad idea.
One of the things, and I have part two, Chairman, what I was hoping to hear from this is what other counties are doing about thorough background checks, because the incidents that are fresh to me are where the person came from out of state and they had a history. And is there not a clearinghouse or a way to get really a thorough background?
Well, it depends on which piece of their background you're referring to, because if it's criminal, then yes, you've got the FBI registry and your local level criminal background that comes in and is thorough. Most, I'd say 99% of the time, I have seen where something did not flag but that's not our database, that's their database issue. When it comes to a certificate standpoint, that's where the difficulties arise. And there is not currently a database that includes all states to find those sanctions.
So what is a best practice? If someone comes from out of state, are we then contacting that state, or is that a recommendation? Or are we strictly relying on that person being honest? Which, in like at least one case, that didn't serve us very well.
They run it through the current database to ensure that what we can get, we do get. So we're checking as hard as we can on that.
But in the estimate of the gentleman that did the evaluation, we're doing as good as we can possibly do?
Well, the certification department at the Department of Education does their due diligence too. And my understanding is that the particular situation that you're referring to, they missed it too. They did not find out this person was even worked in another state or had a certificate lost in another state too. So the first check is, I think, with the Department of Education when they do a certification check.
Okay.
So and then the district, through one thing again, I'll mention again, one thing I think has been very productive is working together with Mr. Farnsworth and his team, because I think we've tightened up a lot of the potential areas that have been loose ends in the past. And I think that we will be as thorough as possible as we can be, but you can't guarantee that every single situation, because like Mr. Farnsworth said, there isn't a national certification database.
But if I could answer your question, Mr. Mathias, I think that the answer to your question is yes. We are doing everything within our control and within our power to be able to determine if there are any missteps or anything in a person's background that maybe they didn't disclose. We follow every process and procedure available to us, but there are cases in which, like the case we were referring to, where they went around the system that we would not have had access to without we just wouldn't have known. I think that certainly we've tightened up some documentation processes. They brought us some best practices from some other districts, one of those being those letters or templates, which I just wanted to say is not, I referred to it as a letter of reprimand. Right. I don't believe it actually says anything about reprimand in the letter. It's more of a letter of notice that there was a misstep and that it's just documentation. So I know a letter of reprimand day one seems a bit harsh, but it was more of just that documentation process to say to the individual, we did find out that, yes, you did miss a step, and here's our expectation moving forward, was the intent of the letters. I don't think that I think there was 3 different letters of varying different degrees, but your general person with a bad check is receiving a letter of documentation versus a letter of reprimand. So a little bit different, a little bit softer verbiage than what we heard a few minutes ago.
Yes, and our verbiage in there said that letters of this nature should also provide clear directives and/or expectations related to the professional standards that will be expected of that applicant at the time of their employment. So if they went back and did exactly the same thing that you just wrote them the letter about, then that would be grounds for termination. Right. Just to point out, and I think
in terms of some of the background checking, and this is in the hiring processes outline, there are 2 databases, the certification database and the FDLE staff termination base. There's PPS, and I think they're exhausting all of them at this point, that on the background checks as the other districts we've been to, they do follow the same process in terms of here's what's available, we're going to look at all of these areas. But as Dr. Vogel mentioned, there is no national database, because we've dealt with the same things in Seminole and when I worked in St. Lucie. Some states are not very forthcoming in terms of providing information. It's like, I'll date myself, it's like the old days, real old days, when I started in HR, when if we were going to terminate you, you could actually negotiate and get a document that says if a district calls, they can't share information about your termination. And it wasn't that long ago that we had that in the state of Florida. Well, thank goodness that's all been changed now. It's far more open system than it was before. So.
I have a question, please. In the past, we've had the verbal recommendations, and any new employee, whoever the hiring manager was, they were responsible for making 2 phone calls. Are we still using that?
Yes, we do, and that was a piece I wanted to mention, that where even a lot of that would flush out in lack of an out-of-state database. When you contact the last supervisor for that person in the reference check, part of the problem with the instance that we keep referring to is there were dishonest people that we reached in our reference checks also that gave dishonest references. So we kind of got hung up with that. But yes, that is definitely something that we make sure that they're committing those references appropriately.
There was something about that that always bothered me when I was a hiring manager. Is there a way that we can require that the person that they speak to has to have been a supervising person? Because I think that will eliminate or help to eliminate some of those things where they can give you a name, and you get anybody on the phone, and like you said, they aren't necessarily honest.
We do keep an eye out for that, so it's not just their best friend podmate. It's got to be a supervisor, because they'll try and put everybody on there. And I will say there are times where people are just not cooperative with an applicant, or they, at this point in time, we've seen where they're not real happy if they're leaving them also. So we keep an eye on it, and if someone, like if a principal calls us and says, look, I've talked to this one supervisor, this other one, after numerous attempts to get a hold of them, we can't get any feedback. We called this person, this third reference they listed who wasn't a supervisor, are we good to move forward? And if we deem that it is okay to move forward, we allow them to move forward.
Okay.
But it doesn't go unvisited. Okay,
And I have one other question about the letter or whatever we place when someone has done something. In the SEIU contract, they stack on letters of reprimand. You get 1, certain things happen, you get 2, certain things happen. Are we counting this letter as a part of that process? Should there be disciplinary action in the future?
No, we would not, because it would not stand up in a grievance procedure. If they came in and we were disciplining them, I think if it reached a level of termination where they were contesting a termination or a suspension, mainly a termination, I think it would be a record in time that could be entered possibly through evidence that, look, we're building a track record here. But I don't think we have to start with their discipline process once they enter under the umbrella of that contract, or at least that's how I interpret.
Yeah. That would be my only concern, back to Mr. Mathias's point. If we were starting their disciplinary history prior to them becoming an employee, I think that might be a problem. Thank you.
Is there a place where those reference checks are documented that you called so-and-so and, okay.
That is, yes, sir.
I guess I just kind of asked that question because I think one of our citizen watchdogs had brought up some time that there was somebody who had listed the same phone number for all their references, but different names. And so that if that person had genuinely done those reference checks, then wouldn't they have seen that?
What people say sometimes is not accurate to reality. I have not seen where one person listed one phone number. You might have multiple references. If you got a principal and an assistant principal at a school, you're going to list the school number, and that could represent several people.
Sure.
But as far as I was here one time, there, and here, and then putting one phone number, we don't see that happen.
Okay.
I can't say that it doesn't happen, but that's not something we see coming up.
And to the supervisor point, is it a requirement that those references be from a supervisor? So I guess the question is, like, depending on what company you've worked for prior, you may not get to talk to that supervisor, that it goes through a central department or an HR, and the HR is going to be the one to give you, yes, that person worked here and they're eligible for rehire, and that's all the information they might give you.
We do the best we can. Sometimes those people are no longer of the earth.
Right.
You just deal with it, and you do the best you can to vet that person as a good employee.
Or sometimes people don't want their current employer to know that they're looking elsewhere.
That is true.
Right? And so what do you do in those situations?
Well, I think most of the time your administrators, your administrators at the building level are handling that. Like, look, that one of the first questions I asked, does your current supervisor know you're here? I'll give you X amount of window to break the news to them, but I got to call them, and that's usually where that occurs. So, but it's funny because some people think they can apply at one school in Lake County and apply at another school in Lake County and nobody will find out. But it's like, go ahead and do it on the front end.
Any other questions, board members? We exhausted the conversation. Okay. I appreciate your
Excuse me,
work.
Chairman.
Yep, go ahead.
I just
Mr.
wanted to say to Mr. Farnsworth
Mhm.
that based on the initial findings, that you've done an outstanding job. And I really appreciate your department for what the work you're doing and being willing to tweak to make us better. So I'm very grateful as a board member.
Thank you so much. I have a team of many that helps. Thank you.
Yep, thank you guys
Thank you very much.
Thank
Great
you.
discussion.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for all your time and your expertise in this area. I know we've gleaned a lot from your feedback and recommendations, and to Mr. Mathias's point, certainly has made us better. And so thank you for your time, and I know you
Thank you.
had a long drive over this morning, so
It's our
we're
pleasure,
grateful
not
for
our
that.
honor.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you have any questions, you all know how to get us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did anybody need 5 minutes to use the restroom, or are you guys okay to keep going? I just wanted to check in. You good? Okay. Okay, Mr. Mock. It's freezing.
I was looking for a blanket. You got a blanket?
I came prepared today. Dressed. Our last item on our agenda, thank you for being here and being patient, Mr. Mock. We appreciate it.
No problem. Kind of waiting for the presentations to get up there.
Okay. You guys have the presentation? Which one do you want first?
The Chrome.
The Chromebooks.
Chrome inventory. There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, school board. I'm bringing 2 audits that have been completed, and they've been brought before the audit committee and approved to come forward to the school board. First one is the Chromebook inventory audit. Next slide, please. The overview, real quick, on this audit was looking at the 44,500 plus Chromebooks purchased between 2017 and 2020, and the majority of them were obviously purchased in the 1920 timeframe. The school district has expended a little over $11 million for these Chromebooks, and just for information, that breaks down to an average cost of about $248 per Chromebook. Procedures for this, because it was done during the pandemic when they were distributed, was done very quickly and done on the fly. The IT department did provide Zoom meetings for the schools to provide them information on how to distribute these Chromebooks. And then it came down to the where we had purchased some software in the Destin textbook management system, and it was that additional software was to help us inventory the Chromebooks, and that was to be implemented at the close of the school year, June 30th, 2021. So from my findings from this, next slide, I found that the Chromebook physical inventories were not 100% accurate. The IT department initially started tracking these Chromebooks on an Excel spreadsheet, and then the schools obviously were to bring those into their school and barcode scan them, get them into the Destin software. And from the schools that I completed, there was about a little over 8% error rate. So it's kind of high for controlling and tracking and safeguarding these assets of the school district. Some of the schools I noted from the ones that I was able to visit needed to improve the storage systems. And on page 5 of the audit report, I kind of gave you in the top part of the few pictures at the top, kind of how some were doing a good job storing them, and then the pictures down below was kind of not so good, where they just kind of stacked them up, made it a little bit harder to do counts. And I also a little concerned, I don't know how many Chromebooks you can stack on one on top of the other before the other for the bottom one might actually, screen might break or the case might break. So we need to consider that. And then currently, well, as I said, IT is using an Excel spreadsheet, and we're trying to get these Chromebooks into the Destin software. So my recommendations for this audit were, first, in the Destin software, I think we need to develop, and it has the ability to create reports, to develop a stock status report. And the idea behind this is it would help to anybody that would want to go check to see what's available, because at different times of the year, you might want to go check your storage and to see how many is there. And if the system says you're supposed to have 100 Chromebooks in storage, you would want to be able to walk in there and see that you have 100 Chromebooks. And then you would have the next column over, which would be checked out the students and staff, and then maybe a third column that would show what was returned to Chrome Depot for repairs. So just kind of keeping track of that too. And then continue to encourage the schools to address the gaps in the physical inventory. And I'm sure a lot of that was taken care of when they started handing them back out. And then obviously this year when they come back in, we should be able to address those gaps. And then I thought third would be, because of the storage things that I saw, that some had very good practices in how they were storing, would be to develop a way to share some of those best practices out. Because it's a lot easier to count those Chromebooks when they're in stacks of 5 and 10. You can literally walk in there and, a couple minutes be done, where if they're in multiple stacks, stacked very high, it takes a lot longer to dig through them and count them out and determine how many you have. And then I think you saw in some of the pictures where they kind of put the plugs, the chargers in front of them. You couldn't hardly see what was behind them, so you had to kind of move the plugs out, the chargers out of the way, then to count them, and put the chargers back up. Where some of them used tubs, and they stored all the chargers down in the tubs. So just thought some of them used some very good practices that could be shared out to the other schools, and that would be helpful. Any questions?
I did have a couple of questions and thoughts, and one is that I'm going to applaud the efforts to try to get the record keeping down to a greater science. I know that the pressure to roll this out so quickly, you were under intense pressure to get that out, and
yeah, that's one of the things that was,
learning, so.
Yeah, that was one of the things that expressed to me. And then coming up to the end of the year, it was, noted there's probably a lot of pandemic people that were just tired at the end of the school year. So getting that, that was kind of one more thing that they had to do. And in some situations, it didn't get the attention it needed to.
Yeah, and one thing I'm really going to kind of be interested in, and maybe it's kind of too early to tell, particularly because we have so many Chromebooks in our fleet that are just a couple of years old, is over time, are we getting the life expectancy that we expected to get? I know that they've got a shelf life of 5 years, but we're really maybe thinking 4. But, I do know a number of kids with a 2019 Chromebook, and it's now running very sluggishly, or, when they're trying to click their mouse, there it goes. Okay, I got it. And now it's clicked in some random place on the screen, and so. Yeah,
I know the operating system has a 5-year life.
Right.
And that's not based on when we purchase it. That could be based on the day we purchase. So if it's 5 years and we purchase it in the 3rd year, we may only get 2 years out of that operating system. But I know some of those operating systems have been extended, according to Mr. Weeks. So, we can get a little bit longer. But I think we need to learn what our life expectancy of a laptop, or a Chromebook in the hands of a student might be.
But with
it may be 3 years.
With the variables you suggested with storage as well, you just mentioned we don't know how many Chromebooks we could stack on top of one another.
Correct.
The one that is on the bottom.
Complicated.
And then pushing down. So I don't even know if that data would be an accurate reflection of the life of a Chromebook, just depending on what we're working with.
Yeah, I want to second what Mr. Dodd said. Like, there is a difference between the operating system and the actual hardware of the keyboard and the screen and those things, and they may have different lifespans, and they probably have different lifespans in the hands of children. I have heard lots of complaints, and my own children have had broken Chromebooks multiple times, screens that are broken, keys that are broken. It's just very frustrating and they're very slow to use. And I've also heard inventory complaints from parents and schools. So I just want to second or whatever, all of these issues, because they're actual issues that we need to handle. And the last one I wanted to bring up was the charging. There seems to be a major problem with charging because all 4 of my kids' schools will say, please make sure that they have their Chromebooks fully charged to go back to school, which is fine if they're using them for homework, but I'm not sure that they have enough chargers at school. So that's all I have to say.
Mr. Weeks, would you like to?
Yeah, I was going to say those are Mr. Weeks' questions.
Yeah.
So a couple things is that the Chromebook ended up being the $230 device that kind of could, right? Because like some of them have lasted close to 4 years. And when you actually look at the return on investment on a yearly cost, it's pretty good. You are correct. Like some of the devices are getting slower. When the pandemic broke out, we basically took anything that would have been existing in a school and we got it out into a parking lot, got it into Google Sheets as fast as we possibly could, and then got it into the hands because remember we had that 11-day concentrated time frame, right? And I do want to say that the work of the schools was very heroic. Like it was one of the largest efforts I ever led because there were people at the schools, there were people at the district office, just getting it done, right? However, one of the things is that because they were flushing out their inventories, the Chromebooks actually have been around now, some of them for 4 years and some change. And so some of the devices that went into parents' hands to get us to go one-to-one, because if you remember, my long dead 5-year technology roadmap basically had us this year doing what? We would have done middle schools, we would have been doing the first half of elementary schools over a 4-year period. Instead, we went from 8 one-to-one schools to 42 relatively rapidly, which wouldn't recommend if you have any choice, but we didn't. It was what was good for students. I will say this is that we have to, I'll give you some statistics to me that just blow my mind because we're getting ready to prepare the update for the technology roadmap. You know, we do the 5-year plan and we do what we've accomplished. And right now, the inventory audit was done in the summer. And the summer was a bit of a challenge because people did leave the building relatively quickly. And of course, a lot of the staff that are very involved with it, they're not there during the summer. They're just not under contract. Mm-hmm. So they may have had devices in other areas, and it was a difficult road, right? We have a lot of electronic. So to kind of sort of address the age piece, we know what our inventory is pretty firmly, to be honest with you. And we know that right now we are sitting on some of those initial devices because those things took off. They were kind of the runaway hit of about 3 or 4 years ago. If schools had money, they bought as many as they could fairly fast. So it wasn't just our one-to-one schools. And so we have about 13,000 devices that are starting to get in that sluggish/brick phase to some extent of just being old. And so right now we're sitting as a result of the ECF. If you remember, we took that to y'all. It was earlier in the fall. It's basically the chance to get, well, we got 11,000 Chromebooks, and then the federal government, like a lot of things, the federal government swears they'll reimburse us. In the next little bit, we got the award letter, so it's hanging on my desk in case you want to see it. So I'm going to hold them to it. But there's 11,000 Chromebooks to start replacing. We're sitting on about 5,500 to 5,600 Chromebooks to start that replenishment process. So we've got a good down payment, right? As far as the chargers go, it's kind of funny. Screens were the #1 thing that was broken, but lost chargers have now surpassed that in cost to some extent. And so we've started to see that. And the Chromebook, the one thing I will say about even the older devices, we get a little bit of it. If you would have asked me what would have caused this to be a very difficult road, it would have honestly been the fact that usually batteries over time, if you charge them and charge them and charge them, start to dwindle. And honestly, the battery replacement, we have not had a lot of that, which is kind of the surprise finding of it. But the processors are getting slower, or at least slower compared to the demands. And I think you will see us roll out, when we do the update, a pretty healthy replenishment. The one staggering statistic to me, to be honest with you, and this goes all the way back 3 years. So you have to consider this is one-to-one high schools, the very beginning of these devices. Over 95% of the devices over that 3-year span have been returned, which is kind of shocking, to be honest with you. If you think about the troubles and the tribulations as far as the pandemic goes and all the mobility of students that we saw and everything like that. And we're getting ready to do our final inventory, which will probably expose some of those because they could be sitting dead on a shelf somewhere of Chrome Depot, which is our basically, it's not as impressive or cool as it sounds. It's basically just this portable off to the back where all the Chromebooks come to get finished. We're going to start inventorying that in late February. We figure by March we'll have a good feel for it. But really when you think about just the mobility and just kind of sort of the craziness going on, and of those devices, almost half of them are going to end of life this year anyway. So we'll probably come to y'all with some updates as far as how to handle them in the future. I think we are really getting close to the device being an instructional material and literally the language being lockstep with that. So, just to provide that update. But we're aggressive. I try to go find everyone. We chased one down to a store a couple days ago. Like somebody said, I got this. So I'm like, we'll be right over. So,
Can I just real quickly address, I think part of the charger problem isn't just the actual charger, like, the physical cord that comes from the computer. I think it's also the fact that I'm not sure the schools have enough charging, power strips or whatever you would, like a charging station.
yeah, that makes sense.
So I think we might need to add that into what is part of the Chromebook inventory, if that makes sense. So that when they get it, they get the ability to charge them at the school in groups of 25 or whatever.
For sure. And I think this is one of the things that we may have, I had to remember, there's a lot that's been going on, right? But I think in ESSER 3 that came up in some of the stakeholder meetings. And so I think we put that in there. I'd have to double check that again and see. But we will definitely, I think that is something that we'll need. And we'll kind of bring y'all some updates and some options as we move forward.
Thank you for all the details, though.
I've got kind of a best practice sort of question just from the classroom side of things, and maybe it contributes to some of the mobility of Chromebooks or disappearance, I'm not sure. So kid shows up at school, we got more than 40,000 kids. Statistically, somebody's forgotten their Chromebook that day, right? And it's statistically bad then when you've shown up to school without your Chromebook and there's a test that you have to take in that certain period. Teacher says, sorry, you don't have your Chromebook, you're not taking the test, you're gonna have to borrow from a friend.
For sure.
And so then in high school, they start texting all their friends, can I borrow your Chromebook? Oh, I need it this period. Oh, I don't need it this period, but you can have it. So then they go to the other class, they get the other kid's Chromebook, bring it, do the test or whatever. Or another situation I know of that the teacher made the kid wait till another kid was done. Now you can use it. Now I only had half the time the rest of the class would have had for the test to get it done. So, is there some sort of, hey, I forgot my Chromebook, I can come check a loaner out for the day, and there's some sort of consequence for that, or I don't know,
So I think probably the solution is the device is relatively affordable. But we're kind of, if you would have asked me, the first year we went one-to-one, it did not feel like a normal year we were doing for various reasons, right? And so, we were just kind of evening things out. This year has felt a little bit more like that, and I think one of the things that we always had built in for things like maybe class sets or checkouts was a healthy 5% reserve. I think the trick is just because the initial for us to get into a one-to-one position was so difficult, to be honest with you. Right. There was just so many, and and it's so funny too, because wax nostalgic for it, right? It's we got these Chromebooks in the middle of this insane supply constraint that just strangles everything, right? And so, but now as we're emerging from that a little bit, I do think that's something that we look at the refresh pattern that we need to look at as far as class sets or a couple things. I think we probably need to and we have been doing this internally, almost re-examine the entire project, because where we went was somewhere that we were just kind of drugged by the pandemic, quarantine, things of that nature. But originally the 5-year plan that I brought to y'all, because we had a little bit of concern about screen time, was more like a class set for K2, if you remember, and then maybe we hadn't quite made the decision on whether elementary was going to go home and things of that nature, just because we weren't there yet. We were in high school, we felt pretty convinced about that. So I do agree with you, and I think it's something that we can work in as a reserve of a temporary checkout or so. I think the only thing we want to make sure that we do as best we can, and this has been the trick because we have an attempt to get every Chromebook back, and we have had webinars, we've had amnesty days, things of that nature to try to shake the trees and get anything that we can. I think it's a situation where we do also need to make sure where the device is going home that we aren't undoing the accountability for the student. Because I do think, especially for high school students, it's a life skill. If at home, if I lose my laptop or leave my laptop, and I'm pretty dead in the water today.
That's right.
So I think it's that balance, and I think there's a little bit of that. But I agree with you with the younger grades. I think we have to kind of maybe re-examine that.
Yeah, and I recognize that life skill part that's there. And the last thing we want is a kid with 8 Chromebooks checked out, right? That's ridiculous, But at the same time, I say, okay, so you forgot your Chromebook, so now because of that, you're gonna bomb this test today, and now you're not gonna show what you know in ELA because you didn't bring your Chromebook, and so I don't know, and I guess if we've got a few extras in each classroom, then the teacher could feasibly, okay, well, I'm gonna remember, or I'm gonna mark down whatever it is that you're not prepared for your class today with your materials that you need,
And then get it
but here you go. Or if, you've got the exact number of Chromebooks in the class and suddenly this kid's Chromebook starts having flames come out of it, and okay, well, you're not gonna be able to use that one. Here's one that you're gonna be able to use this, for this assignment today, like, what does that, look like? So.
For sure. And I think too, that's a testament to the project to some extent is how
Right.
essential they've become, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Mr. Weeks?
Thank you.
I do want to reiterate just how impressive the work was and the work has been done. So I know we did a follow-up audit, we found some things, and you guys are constantly looking for ways to improve what you're doing, but what you did was a feat that was amazing.
Yeah, I think we're building the policies and procedures
Right now.
as we go. I
That's
mean,
right.
from what he was saying and what you guys are
That's right.
saying, I mean,
That's right.
marrying the two, to me, it just sounds like, we're learning as we go, and I think we're going to get better as we get there. I guess the key is documenting it down and distributing it to all schools, because what we share in one can help a lot of others as well.
And I think too, like looking at who's in charge, and I'm sure you guys are dealing with this as well, just thinking about the summer fatigue and everything that everybody's doing right now and how this job just feels a little bit different in the current environment. And it says everything that at the school, right? The school technology department continues to train and collaborate with schools on the processes, properly checking in and out, submitting work orders and repairs, placing fines on student accounts, tracking this is an extensive and exhaustive list, and who's doing that?
Yep.
And that's just what I think,
And what else are they doing on top of
principals right now who
that?
are in
Yeah.
cafeteria lines serving and in classroom substituting, and I'm not sure they just want to make sure that kids have Chromebooks right now. They're not thinking about this
And then
procedure.
procedurally over the summer, like when Mr. Weeks said, they're gone for the summer.
Sure.
But yet all these books are coming in over the
Right.
summer, and they end up on carts.
Just
And then
sitting on carts,
Yeah, and then
right.
they wheel the carts, and then sometimes when you come in the media, there was like maybe 2 carts back there, plus one at the front office. So, what are our procedures over
Right.
the summer months as the late comers, late Chromebooks come in? What are our procedures? How do we get them back in
Standard
so that
operating
they're ready
procedures
to
would
be
be
checked
nice.
back out when the students show up in August? So it's just a lot of things that have
is
to
a
be
lot.
filled in along the way, and
It's a lot.
we'll get there.
Yeah.
I think it'll take a little bit of time, but we'll get there. And then, like I said, just sharing those best practices out.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next.
Great?
Thank
Great.
you.
Next audit, Chromebook, or excuse me, the copier and printer audit, please. This one may sound familiar. I did do a contract audit for copiers and printers in 2018, 2019. And next slide, please. And if you remember, I presented that there could be some savings in this audit, anywhere from $200,000 to $230,000. And I think from this audit, you'll see where we were able to, not we, but the school district was able to accomplish that, and the committee that was put together that signed the new contract for copiers and printers. And so I obviously started this audit doing the same thing, reading through the contract and the agreements of the contract, and looking at some of the information reports that are printed out. I looked at the vendor billings, and I also did a school survey to find out how they were working out in the school district. Time period for this was September 2020 through September 2021. Next slide, please. I'll just go to the findings. Basically, I took the findings from the last audit, and I just kind of looked to see how we did in implementing my recommendations from that audit. And as you can see from this slide, we did a terrific job. The savings were over $281,000. We were able to reduce the cost of the leased copiers. We were also able to reduce the number of copiers from 310 to 303. We eliminated the paid copies. We also were able to reduce the cost per copy on copiers for both white and colored. And we were also, on the printer contract, we were also able to reduce the cost of the copiers for own printers, as well as the rental printers that we get as well. And on the survey, the satisfaction came back a lot better. I attribute that, and number one is we put all brand-new copiers out in the school district, and, you know, the other copiers, the last time I did it, were coming up on 5 years old. So so time will tell on these copiers, you know, how well they survive 5 years of wear and tear daily. So, and new recommendations, next slide, please, for this audit. Once again, I know I made this recommendation last time, but and I think it's even more important now because I think there's more savings here, where if we can educate our staff whenever possible on large print jobs to use the copier over the printer. And now we're looking at almost, I know you combine the two, but about 50% savings. You know, 60, if you're just doing grayscale, it's 60% and 40% more on color copies. Another recommendation I made was 30% of our annual printer cost is actually coming out of the district office right here. There's I think I counted 119 printers, and that's about almost $30,000 worth of printers off the printers, not the copiers, the printers. And if we could divert that to the copiers, some of that, obviously we would have that savings that I just talked about before of 60% on grayscale and 40% on so it basically cut the cost in half, if that makes sense. So
I guess some of that might be contingent on what they're printing. Like if a lot of the tasks are, here's one page coming out,
yes,
right? Then what does it cost for an employee to walk down the hall to get that one page?
And that's why I was saying on larger print jobs.
30% of the annual printer cost isn't going to be one-page pieces
so
here and there.
So I'm wondering, is most of the work one page, or is it?
You know, I didn't dig in. I think each of the directors should assess their own who has printers in their area, why they have printers, and maybe they're needed. Maybe they. But to me, the copiers are secure because you have to go up and put your code in to get your information out. So it's not going to be like it's sitting back there and somebody might pick it up. You're going to go back, put your code in, it's going to print it while you're there, and you're going to leave. So
I guess internally I would do a little math and go, okay, my document's only 3 pages, I'll print here. But if it's like 7, I'm going to walk down the hall. You know, I don't know how you come to that conclusion.
Yeah,
but
my other thought was just looking through the billings in that. I know a copier has more functionality than a printer does, obviously, but some areas where the copiers are not being used that much, could they use a printer? But they may not be able to because of the functionality of a copier. You can do scanning, you know, you can do you know, all that stuff, sorting and stapling and that, and where a printer, it's just obviously going to print out. But, you know, in some cases, to look at some of those areas and say, hey, maybe you don't need a copier, you could do all your work off of a printer. Maybe, I don't know. If there's a copier within reasonable
to deplete
distance.
the number of copiers that we have to save there. That's what
It may, because you may be paying more because you're paying a quarterly fee on your copier, and then on, you know, so just looking at that.
But it reminded me of the timeline of when we could change the number of copiers. We can always add more, but we can't take them away from that.
Right.
Right. So
yeah,
so
we
when
can't
does
take
that-
them away. So the key with that is the IT obviously looks and manages those for areas that might need it's looking for a copier, and that's the only thing you can do is to move it at that. You know, you can move it anytime.
Until the end of the agreement, though, then you could reduce the number, right?
You can renegotiate, maybe.
Right,
yeah,
right.
you could probably renegotiate.
This is kind of really an interesting point that you made, that it's 30% of the prints are being made at the district office. Because I know some teachers that want printers, and I know some schools that don't necessarily have enough printers for teachers. So I'm wondering if we flip that and say, why is it so high at the district? Should it be higher at the schools? Do we know how all of our printers are being distributed at the schools? That's kind of it's just a really interesting statistic to me that all of our kids, all of our schools, 40 schools, aren't making more than 60% of the print jobs, given 42,000 students that need copies and stuff, right?
Not understanding the question.
Well, like the district staff isn't as huge as all of the rest of the district, right? Mm-hmm. All of the schools, all of the students, and all of that need. So to me, a 30% seems high for basically one sort of section of the district,
Well-
given the needs at the whole rest of the district.
But it's the type of work done at the district office.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, I think it's
too.
the type of work versus,
Sometimes they do print. Dwayne has some insight.
oh, he does, okay.
Come on, Dwayne. Okay.
Mr. Wee-
I'm gonna tell you,
He's a bevy of knowledge.
I love copier projects. It's my favorite thing ever. And
Are you lying, Dwayne?
I
don't
am.
know.
Not gonna disclose that information at this point, but I guess the thing is that, yeah, in the copier contract, we did pretty good. And the printer contract, we've inherited that, so that contract has got a couple of years left. And generally, as a rule, for us getting a printer, like, the company that services the printer contract also had the copier contract. We are much more happy with the printer contract than we are the copier contract. I have a pretty open door. If an administrator puts in a work order for them to have, and just to give you an example, when Lake Point Academy was built, we had talked to them about having printers. We had the company there. They deployed the printers in 2 days to a brand new site. Got no problem with that if an administrator wants it. The one thing that we always want to advise them on, and some of this is a little bit of slippery math, right? Because if I'm printing more, maybe I'm copying less or whatever. So like if you're asking me for the algorithm or the formula of whether you're going to save money, that's a little bit tricky. But I know that a lot of the administrators have expressed a concern if everybody has a printer, that when that bill comes, then they're going to have that bill. And then, it's kind of hard to tell people no, right? Like it's kind of hard to say, okay, you can only print this many copies, and then you're back into that game again. So I feel like the schools have been the experts at kind of organizing that. I will tell you, it is, even in the copier project to some extent, like overall the district did save, but it kind of depended a little on your printing profile a little bit. Like if you were printing heavy or somebody was printing less or they weren't using this copier as much, it could be a little elusive. And so to craft a solution for 42 schools without the school leader being directly involved seems a little out of place for us. I would hate to, say, hey, you've got wall-to-wall printers, and then the bill show up in the next quarter. If that makes any sense. But I mean, as far as as far as our team is ready to do it the second work order is put in by the administrator.
And some of the surveys did come back where they said their costs were higher, but overall, we've dropped our costs. So I'm just wondering, I think it relates to what Mr. Weeks just said. I think if their volume increased at that school, obviously your costs are going to increase as well. So they need to really take some time and look at what they're copying.
Was there consideration to work orders where copiers were down, or were internet issues where teachers couldn't maybe print to the copier because the internet was not working that day appropriately?
So I mean, I think one of the things is that generally the internet outages in Lake County are usually somebody putting a shovel in the ground most of the time, unfortunately, and through a piece of fiber. So I won't say they're rare. I don't want to say they're rare because I probably curse it right now, right? But generally as a rule, I know it's really often. But basically, for the most part, we're pretty stable to some extent. I think the issue with the old copiers was they were old. In fact, they had end of life, and the company had only had one technician. And not to say anything bad, but the technician did not have the best bedside manner when it came to copiers or so. And so there was a pretty decent dissatisfaction. We have a pretty mainline copier now. It's faster. It probably led to a burst in the bill because people are like, cool, it's new, I can print.
It's working.
But for the most part, we do consider it. I think it's more along the lines of I think the service has come up considerably because they're newer, and that company has multiple reps that handle it. They've been pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
The bills are also clearer too. The bills used to come in a phone book, and they weren't organized by school, and finance had to parse them. And now they're as you would expect by school side. Right. That nature. So that's there's a lot of little efficiencies built into it. But on the printer specifically, if somebody wants it, our team's at the ready. So we'll coordinate with that company to get it.
So what kind of determines whether or not you get a printer? So noting in the audit, there are 2,216 printers. So obviously not every teacher's got one. Does every teacher is every teacher who is wanting one, do they get them?
Well,
no.
I mean,
So,
again, I have to defer to the administrator on it. But
So what decides that? What determines that?
Yeah,
the principal?
The principal.
Right.
The principal says at my school, everybody's going to get them. At my school, we're only going to put them in the quads. Or at my school, we're going to, every other room is going to have one. Or, I don't know.
Or just the front desk in some schools.
Which, I mean, I'm open, I'm sorry.
If you remember when I got here, this was this was what I was greeted with was there had just been this massive overhaul, and all of the printers had come out of classrooms, and I had so many teachers complaining. I said, put them all back. And so Dwayne, I think that was his first big project too, was how do we feasibly make this happen, that anybody who wants the printers, we put them all back. And so we've not, to my knowledge, if there are teachers that have requested it, I know we've all personally delivered them. I know I was at Umatilla a couple of years ago helping to unbox some that were in the pods. And so I think teachers found a way to make it work. And they had a pod, they wanted one per pod. It wasn't every teacher wanted one because they were aware of the cost. So I have not had a single request from a teacher asking for one. And we've said, we'll do what we can. But we have worked with leaders to make sure that it is reasonable and that it's feasible. So
Well, that's good. Yes, I recall before your arrival, there were principals who would, okay, well, our school's not having printers anymore, and they just took all these functional printers away, and suddenly they were, and so, but then what happens the next year if a new principal arrives and is like, I want printers. I can't believe last one just got rid of them all. Then what do you do?
Yeah, so what happened at some of the schools around here, I know, is that those printers that were the teachers were put back and they got to keep them, but now they're wearing out because they were personal printers purchased by the teachers, and those teachers now don't have printers.
So a work order could potentially remedy that.
Okay.
The company that provides the printers, I won't say they're free, right? Because they're not, as far as necessarily they're going to charge you per copy, but they will give it to us. There's no additional investment upon the arrival of the printer. So
That's the nice part.
Out is easy. So.
Yeah, and my audit was only saying if you have a large print job, try to go to the copier. Don't do it. If you just, like you said, one page or two, it's a lot easier just to shoot it over to the printer.
Johnny messed up that worksheet, I'm going to print another
Correct.
one.
Yeah.
Versus, I need 25 of these for my whole class.
Exactly. Why not print it
Send
out
that
in
to the copier.
advance, and maybe you have more than one class, so you're going to print more
Right.
than just one class. Let's send them to the copier, print them off, then you have them available to hand out. So it's a lot cheaper.
Any other questions? Mr. Mathias, are you good?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
always fun to revisit copiers and printers. Go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Dodd.
I've got one from just the contractual standpoint, because I think the audit committee had brought this up about the fuel surcharge added, or could be added.
We did not get an answer back. They're not going to charge us any right now. We got that much back, but I don't know at this point when that kicks in. That was an open question from the audit committee, and we're researching it, and I'll email that out as soon as I find out about it. Right now, we're not getting a fuel surcharge.
Right. I think that's just one that the board would be interested in.
But the
because it was
question
like
came up
3%.
with the cost of fuel, obviously predicted to go further higher.
They said
that eventually that maybe that'll kick in, and we didn't know at what point because the contract didn't specify.
And it doesn't specify fuel charge on what? Is it on the entire contract?
And then what's the 5% on, yes.
5% of the entire contract, or 5% of?
And after the meeting, I immediately pulled the contract to make sure I didn't miss something, and I didn't. It's just not spelled out in there.
Yeah.
So
that
we're
would-
trying to get clarity on that.
All
And then, like Mr. Weeks says, next contract, we're going to make sure it's spelled out.
Yeah. All right, excellent.
But it is unclear at this point. I'll try to
Okay.
get some information on that. okay?
Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. It's probably my spitball. Thank you, Mr. Mack. Oh, we are in board member comments. Mrs. Cunningham, would you like to start today?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's been an excellent workshop. I just received a funny email from a former principal who's obviously tuning in, and he commented to me in regards to the dress code. I'm sure no one in the room remembers when teachers in Lake County, female teachers, could only wear a pantsuit, and it had to be a suit, if the temperature was 37 degrees outside. So I responded to him, "Sir, you are dating yourself." But I think that the students did a phenomenal job, and I think that's part of our responsibilities as educators, is to prepare them to be able to step up and make decisions and do things well. We learned some interesting things today, and I think we had a lively discussion. So kudos to all staff members who brought that information to us, and I look forward to making some decisions on some things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham.
Oh,
You're the vice chair. I was waiting. Do you want to go
I don't know, I thought you were just going down the line.
All right, Mr.
No,
Dodd.
that's okay. No, I'll defer to the folks.
Okay. Dr. Burns.
You're the chair.
I also wanted to comment on DENCO, but I just think that he is a remarkable student, and I wasn't able to watch the presentation this morning yet. I will, but I do understand many of the issues that they're bringing up, and I will tell you that as I've noticed people coming into the county, as people move here, they will repeat many of the same things that these children are asking for with regard to the dress code. And I just thought that the way it's been handled by specifically Den Cove Bryant and the rest of that group, I've just been really very, very impressed. And I think our students are remarkable kids. And I just wanted to give him as much, props as I can, because I'm just really impressed by these kids. So it's a good thing to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Burns. Mr. Mathias?
Yeah. So this is my first Zoom meeting like ever attending, and I have to tell you that you really get a better sense of the flavor when you're in the boardroom. But the presentations today from our kids, hearing from the two fellows from FADS and the kudos they gave initially were appreciated, and I hope that the citizens see it and understand that our HR department, there's room to improve, which they've embraced, but also we had a lot of best practices already in place. I'm not there because this morning I've got my school board shirt on, I was good to go. I've had a cough over the weekend and did a test, and I tested positive for COVID. So I'm self-isolated right now. The symptoms, I've been vaccinated and boosted, so the symptoms, quite honestly, are just a cold and runny nose. That's a couple of times when I took the camera off, that I was having a bit of a fit. So,
thank you for that.
So again, miss you guys in person, and that's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Mathias. Mr. Dodd.
Oh, it's my turn. Thank you. Well, the problem of waiting so long is that so many people
I know.
steal the comments, but it was really a refreshing workshop today to kick it off so strongly with the students, and then following up with staff. And what I love about this is that when you put so many different perspectives in the room, you're bound to have some good ideas, and I didn't think of about that, or hey, that's a good angle, and working that in. I think what we've done procedural-wise has been a significant improvement since I first remember looking at any sort of policies and procedures. We've come a long way, and certainly there's a lot more to do, but I'm just thrilled and thankful that the staff has embraced that, and very receptive to feedback, and I think it's good. I think the energy is good, and we're just going to keep going. And and when I highlight when we get a chance to see, Mr. Weeks, you talked about the heroic efforts of the schools, but really your department heroic as well. So don't sell yourself short on that. To be able to roll out so many Chromebooks so quickly to make learning continuous for these students, and now it's about prioritizing. Okay, the most important thing, let's get those in the hands of the kids. Now we'll go back and work on the policies and clean that up, and that's the right priority. So, thank you.
I agree. And I understand, because I get to go last, and I have the same sentiment. Like you all have said, what a pleasure the students were. I wanted to reiterate, I love the idea of the student government conference for all of the student governments to come together. I think that's brilliant. I know that we have a lot of student-led organizations beginning even in middle school, and sometimes I think that the organizers or the teacher sponsors of those events aren't quite sure what to do. And so I always think about how many decisions we make that are impactful of students, and how neat that would be to get them together and to give input. So again, I think the vision for the organization is fantastic, and hearing from them more occasions is something we're all looking forward to, but the opportunity for all of them to learn in a conference would be excellent. And again, your staff brought forward the idea to bring in FADS to look at your current standard operating procedures, and so kudos to you and your staff for doing that, being open to it, and being willing to learn more. So we appreciate all the work that you do, and I won't even talk about Dwayne, because his department is amazing. I say he's amazing. I know you're the face of many people, like Mr. Haas back there with you, that's joining you, and everybody else that's in the department. But I also wanted to let you guys know that Eustis High School took the regional championship for girls weightlifting on Friday night. They actually lost districts. They got second place, and then at the regional competition, they came back to beat the district champions to become the regional champions, and we have several representatives that will be competing at the state level. Umatilla High School also has a representative that will be competing at the state level, and there's a couple at Mount Dora Christian Academy and the Villages Charter School that will have some girls in 2 weeks that will be lifting weights more than me, more than several of us combined, and it's amazing to watch such strong women in the sport that they love. So it's just a privilege to be involved with that through a parent lens and a board member lens. So congratulations to them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's all I have, Superintendent.
Well, just to reiterate how wonderful this group of students is, as our last meeting, they began thinking about their role and a role that they take incredibly serious. And they were concerned as we head into the end of the school year, knowing that they're seniors, is what are we going to do? And so they collectively decided that they want to have a transition where they're bringing in a junior leader so that someone is already there. They're experiencing exactly what the council or the committee's doing, and that we've got a transition once they leave. And so at the last meeting, one of them had already thought ahead and brought their junior class president with them just so that they could listen and be a part of the conversation. And so the others decided that, so our group is growing. So we meet in here once a month. We might have to, who knows? Might have to go over to the BCC building because there's so many wanting to join the group. So it is. Miss Owens joined me last time. I think she left, but I think she too was just in awe at these kids and their conversations and their leadership. So I'm very grateful to them. Just a reminder that Thursday night is our Teacher of the Year ceremony, or one of our very best nights of the year, where we'll be recognizing all of our Teachers of the Year from all of our schools, but announcing the district winner. And those finalists, again, are Courtney Stokes, science teacher from Tavares High, Patrick Kelly, science teacher from Leesburg High, Danielle Newton, who's a third grade teacher at Leesburg Elementary, and Jessica Woods, who's a literacy and avid coach and coordinator at Windy Hill Middle School. So congratulations to them again. We look forward to finding out who our winner is on Thursday night. Also this week, it's a busy week, we have our middle and high school science fair is Friday, and the elementary science fair is next Tuesday, so I'm sure you have those on your calendar. And also on your calendar, hopefully, is our next board workshop, which will be on February 7th at 9:30 here in the boardroom. We'll be picking up some of the other items that obviously today's agenda we knew was going to get a little long, some more in-depth topics. So we've split them up between the next 2 Mondays. So the next one will be the ASIB, as well as some other academic pieces that Dr. Feltner and her team will be bringing to you. So we look forward to that. And that is all I have today. So, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I've had this working? Is it the red?
Yeah.
Okay. The superintendent and I have had a couple of conversations about transitioning the legal services for the school board to a different attorney. I've told her that I was looking right now, planning, unless something else came up, the next 12 to 18 months, that I would go join some of my friends who are play golf 3 days a week instead of working after that period of time. And I also promised her that I would do what I could to make sure that there's a transition to a person, firm. There are different possibilities. There are different organizational structures that you could use to be able to have an attorney going forward, and we wanted to take a look at those as some of the alternatives for what you would do in the future, such as you could hire a firm, you can hire an individual, you could have in-house, you could do a couple of different things. There are boards where there's one attorney representing the board, another attorney representing the superintendent. So there are some options on what we can do, and we would, unless there's some objection, we'll be exploring those options. I know 15 months, 12 months is quite a ways away, but if last year is any indication, it goes pretty quickly, and we want to make sure that we are able to make the best arrangement that we can to bring back to the board for providing those services going forward. So we're going to be working on that and welcome any input or suggestions y'all might have. I've actually started that process a little bit by contacting some folks and seeing what would be what's the availability, there may be some roadblocks to what you want to do, For example, the rates that you're paying are going to have to be looked at if you're going to be hiring a new firm to come in and take, and there's a lot of different ways to structure those, but that's what we're going to be doing, hopefully, and be able to come back with you before too long with something.
All right. Well, thank you for
That's
the
all I
information.
have.
All right. Well, with that, meeting adjourned.